Good evening, everybody. This is Jim Hammond. I work for the city manager at the city of Shoreline. It is now 6:30, and we'll begin tonight's community meeting. Thank you all for coming. I just want to give a brief overview. I have some notes here, so I won't be looking straight into the screen, but I wanted to go over just what we're expecting tonight, and then there'll be a presentation of some basic information, and we'll get to questions and answers then as quickly as we can thereafter that. So thank you again for coming. Tonight is an informational meeting. We are here to share information and answer questions about the proposed enhanced shelter at the former Oaks Nursing Home just south of 165th on Aurora. We will get into the logistics of the meeting in a moment, but there will be two ways to ask questions: in writing using a Q&A function that is part of this Zoom webinar format, or verbally using the raised hand function. And we'll talk about that a bit more later. The whole meeting, including the Q&A material, the written stuff, will be recorded and made available to the public sometime next week on the city's website. We're going to try to get that resolved and fixed and put on, put up as quickly as we can, but we want to make sure it's accurate as well. Some of the questions we'll want to make sure we are able to develop clear answers to. And you will be able to go to shorelinewa.gov, the city website, and you will see a news item on the city's homepage that will take you to all of the information you need. The meeting will start with presentations from the city, the county, and Lake City partners, who will be the operator of the shelter. They will talk about how we got here, how an enhanced shelter works, and what comes next. And I'll introduce everybody here in just a moment. Some members of the Shoreline City Council are listening on this community meeting, same as you folks. Other council members are unable to attend tonight, but they will be reviewing both the recording of this meeting and the associated written notes. So as I said, this meeting is informational in nature. It is not a public hearing. Now, many of you may have thoughts, comments, or opinions that you'd like to share with the council, and I would encourage you to do so. And I know the council does want to hear from you. However, the goal for tonight is to answer questions and to provide information for the proposed shelter. There are ways to provide information to the council, comments and whatever, through the website. And we'll touch base on that again, I'm sure, as we go forward. The most effective way would be through written public comment. And again, you can get to that through the enhanced shelter page through the city's website. Council will be discussing regulations permitting the shelter at their upcoming October 12th meeting. And you can also provide oral comment at that meeting that the council will hear. There will also be a follow-up meeting on the 26th. City staff will talk more about sort of the legislative procedure here in just a couple of minutes. Finally, though, I wanted to acknowledge a handful of your neighbors, folks who commit time each month to helping lead our local neighborhood associations. We met with them last week to get some advice about how to make the most of this meeting. If something goes well this evening, it may well be because of their input. If something does not, it's probably on me or the rest of the Shoreline team. Anyway, I want to give explicit thanks to Maria Ailes, Courtney Ewing, Tom Karsten, Cynthia Knox, and Trevor Rainwater. So let's get started. Meetings like these can take up to 2 hours or more, and we have asked our panelists to commit to being available up until about 9:30 tonight. So that gives us a lot of time to try to get through questions. Now, turning to logistics, I'd like to introduce Polly McCloskey, who also works for the city of Shoreline. She will review the way Zoom works in this webinar format and the options and what happens when it's your time to speak, and she'll go over the Q&A mechanism. Polly?
Welcome, everyone. I am the executive assistant to the city council and the city manager, and I'll be your Zoom support tonight. We are using Zoom's webinar tool today, which means you all as attendees are currently muted, and the cameras will not be functional on your end tonight. But when you do want to ask a question during our Q&A time, there's a variety of ways to do that. If you are joining tonight on a tablet, a smartphone, or a computer, you can type a question into the Q&A function, which is an icon either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on which device you're on. And it says the letter Q and A. And you can type a question and then click send. And we have staff who are monitoring those questions as they come in, and you'll hear a little bit more about that from Jim in a few moments. On all the devices, and including if you called in on telephone, you can also ask a question by electronically raising your hand. So on a tablet, smartphone, computer, there is a hand icon that should be near your Q&A icon. And you can click on that to raise your hand, and I will be notified in a queue of people waiting to ask questions. If you decide to lower your hand, just click it again and it will disappear. If you dialed in tonight by phone, and don't worry, I'll repeat all these instructions later on when we get to our Q&A. If you dialed in tonight by phone, dial *9, and that will raise your hand in my participant list. Once you've raised your hand through either mechanism, I will call on you by name, and a message will appear that said the host would like you to unmute, and you can unmute yourself and then ask your question. And then when your question is complete, you'll go back to being muted. So we'll cover this again right before we go into Q&A with some reminders, or if anybody joins us late, and you're also welcome to ask questions at that time if you're struggling to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. And so I will introduce two other members of the City of Shoreline team, John Norris and Eric Bratton. They will not be presenting tonight, but they will be behind the scenes, so to speak, on the Q&A. John is the Assistant City Manager for the City of Shoreline, and Eric Bratton is a Communications Manager. And they will be helping track the written questions that come in. Where we can provide answers in real time, we will do so. But where we can't, we'll still capture the questions. And those questions, along with answers, will be what we'll be trying to make sure are posted by next week on the website. And then also the recording from tonight's meetings and the answers will all come in. And like I said before, they'll all be posted. So you can ask your question even if you don't have time to stay for an answer, or we're unable to answer it this evening. It will get an answer and it will be posted on the website. And again, you can go through shorelinewa.gov, the city's website, to find your way to all of that information. So let's move on to the presentations. If it isn't already obvious, this is new to all of us. And we hope to work together with you to make this evening a success. We are prepared to stay here up until about 9:30, and if that's what it takes to get through the questions. So with that background, let's get started. I'd like to introduce four panelists. Then they'll take turns introducing themselves, telling you a little bit more about themselves, and beginning the presentation. So we'll hear from Colleen Kelly from the City of Shoreline, followed by Mark Ellerbrook from King County, Melanie Newfield from Lake City Partners, and Kevin McGuire, also from Lake City Partners. So with that, let's turn to the presentations. Colleen.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening, everyone. My name is Colleen Kelly, as Jim said. I am the Director of Recreation, Cultural, and Community Services for this city. I'm glad to be here tonight with the opportunity to talk to you about this proposed project. This is stemming from a council goal that was adopted at their retreat this past April, specifically focused on a desire to work together with our North King County city partners in support of trying to site a shelter somewhere in North King County. Unbeknownst to any of us at the time, there were some unforeseen circumstances that brought this opportunity to the fore much more quickly than we would have anticipated when that goal was adopted. In June of this year, we learned that the former Oaks nursing home facility would be offered for sale. And the owners contacted the city about whether we might have interest in purchasing that facility. We didn't do much with that at the time. The following week, we learned that the State Department of Commerce was in the process of preparing to release a grant focused on expanding shelter capacity in King County. Knowing that that was very much in alignment with a county goal, I reached out to our colleagues there, and you'll hear from Mark Ellerbrook in a moment, to inquire about the potential to put this all together into something that could address the council's goal, again, more quickly than we would have thought. So Mark will talk a little bit more about the follow-up work that he did with another partner organization to continue exploring the feasibility of that. By August, we decided that we needed to come back to the council. It was looking like the arrangements to take possession of the facility could potentially work, that the grant possibility was relatively viable, and we needed to talk to the council as to whether or not they wanted staff to continue working on this project. So on August 10th, we presented the background to the council and shared with them the underlying situation related to the site, which is that the zoning that it currently has does not allow shelter as a use on that site. And that if they wanted the city to proceed with potentially housing a shelter there, it would require action on their part. So council that evening did direct staff to do two significant things. One was to develop interim regulations to be brought back for their consideration, addressing the issue of the allowed uses on the site. And the other was to begin a public outreach process, because we had not yet engaged the public at all, given the circumstances around how this developed. And that was really important to the council that we had time to do that. So since August, those are the two activities we've been really engaged in. On the outreach front, we developed a website addressing the parameters of the proposed operation, in addition to some specific FAQs, frequently asked questions regarding some of the program operations. We have been responding to emails, a number of which have been sent either to staff or to council, as we've been able to keep up with that. We conducted a targeted mailing to nearby businesses with the offer to meet individually with any business owners that might want to do that. We also, as Jim mentioned, had a specific meeting with some of the neighborhood leaders of Richmond Highlands, Highland Terrace, and Meridian Park neighborhoods to get both to share information and to get some thoughts from them about how best to arrange this meeting and how best to proceed with partnering well with neighborhoods going forward if this project continues. Again, as Jim mentioned, there is council action pending. The interim development regulations, as I mentioned, are planned to be brought back to council for discussion on October 12th. And they are scheduled for council action on October 26th. And so those are additional opportunities to actually any council opportunity for that, as well as anytime via the website. So with that, I will stop and turn it over to my colleague, Mark Ellerbrook.
Great, thanks very much, Colleen. I appreciate that. And thanks for having the county represented. Again, my name is Mark Ellerbrook, and I work for the Department of Community and Human Services, where I am the Division Director for Housing, Homelessness, and Community Development for the county. Just a little bit quickly, context-wise for the county. So as the regional government, we actually support and operate a regional shelter system throughout the county. We have almost 2,000 shelter beds that we support through lots of partnerships with cities and agencies like Lake City Partners. And so we work throughout the region to support people living homeless in our community, trying to engage them through shelter into services. I think folks are probably aware, but we have, unfortunately, a very large number of folks who live homeless in our community in King County. When last we did the one-night count in January, there were over 12,000 people on that one night who were homeless in our community. About half those folks living in shelter, the other half living outdoors on the streets and encampments and other locations. And then actually, if you look over the course of a year, over 30,000 people experience homelessness and touch our homeless system every single year in King County. So this, unfortunately, is a pervasive problem that really touches all of us and all of our communities, often people who we know, or certainly people we see every day. You know, where the county is trying to go, and what I think was really exciting about Shoreline reaching out to us about this opportunity with Lake City Partners in this facility, is the county is really trying to evolve the shelter system into a 24/7 shelter system. So historically, folks are probably aware, shelter operates on a kind of an overnight basis. People come in at night, stay overnight, and then they leave in the morning. What we know is that that's an okay system for keeping people alive. It is not a great system for engaging with people, helping bring people in indoors long term, and really helping those folks to begin to address the barriers they have to housing, whatever they may be. So we have been working diligently throughout the county to really begin to convert our system to one that provides shelter services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I think one thing that's exciting is the opportunity that the Oaks presents to kind of expand that work. So as Colleen mentioned, the county got involved when the city of Shoreline reached out to us with the Oaks opportunity and a grant response that the county was helping lead to the State Department of Commerce for the expansion of shelter services throughout the county. And I can report that we actually did and were successful in receiving the grant funds from the Department of Commerce. So that's exciting. And then what we worked with the city of Shoreline to do was to figure out how best to essentially take the Oaks property off the market so that we could continue to pursue and consider how it could be used for a shelter. And we brought in the King County Housing Authority as a partner to do that. They are an excellent operator of housing throughout the county. They also are an active real estate partner with the county from time to time. And while they are distinct and different from King County government, we do work with them to acquire property, to hold property. In this case, they really have stepped in simply as a holder of property. And ultimately, we'll be looking to King County government, the city of Shoreline, Lake City partners to really be the shelter operators in this case. The county and its funding partners, including the state, will be responsible for funding both the facility, the physical space, and its operations. And then I think the county really works with all local governments and with our partners like Lake City partners to ensure that the program operates well, that it's kind of operating within our standards, within federal standards, about how shelters should be operating and how shelters can be good neighbors and how the community can participate in their success. And so that's really the role for the county. And I think we're excited to be participating with the city of Shoreline, who is always an excellent partner with King County government. So thank you for that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Melanie Newfield from Lake City Partners to talk about their role.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. It is really good to be with all of you tonight, and I just appreciate that there's 166 participants that are present here and concerned about homelessness. This is a really important and concerning time for all of us, I think, when we see people on the street suffering. I just want to give you a little background on where Lake City Partners emerged from. I am a resident of Lake City, just to start, and I've worked in social work for the last 24 years and lived in Lake City and worked with the neighborhood for the last 14 years. And really, Lake City Partners emerged very organically. I've been the chair of the Lake City Task Force on Homelessness for the last 14 years. And really the goal of that group is to find neighborhood solutions to address homelessness. And so out of that work, we did open a day center back in 2007. And that was a really beginning opportunity to start to engage folks, to allow folks to come into a space where they could cook their own food. We could start building relationship. They could store their belongings. They could shower. They could do their laundry. Some of those beginning things that really help people to survive and start to reorganize their lives and think about housing solutions. And so we have tried to be really housing focused in our work and worked very closely with the neighborhood organizations in Lake City. And over time, we really knew that also developing a shelter for the Lake City, North King County area was really important because especially in the winter months, we wanted people to be able to survive, but knew that just offering more services really created an opportunity to engage people in a deeper way and understand the barriers that people are facing when they're looking for housing and trying to get out of homelessness. So I wanted to, well, our initial, after starting the day center, we, our big model was working with the faith communities and having a rotating shelter that moved through Shoreline and even into Kenmore throughout the years. And so each month it would move to a different location. And if you think about that model, that's mats on the floor, that's people sleeping all in one space. And thinking about this pandemic, it really seemed challenging to imagine under COVID-19, how do we allow people to sleep in one room together? And so could we find a different option? And knowing that this Oaks facility offers separate sleeping spaces, people will have their own rooms. It really feels like a really good solution that provides dignity and privacy and really just the funding that Mark mentioned coming from the state and additional funds from King County really will allow us to staff up and do the supportive things that we need to do to walk alongside people. Especially, I think about our excitement about even being able to hire a public health nurse in that setting. We've worked for a long time with Seattle University College of Nursing. They've been a great partner, and knowing that people are not well when they're on the street, that they're suffering from a lot of hidden ailments, chronic conditions, just being able to be aware of those conditions can really, really help. So we wanna do a full surround of people coming into the space and being able to serve 60 people. Lake City Partners does have a board of directors and it's representing different partners throughout the North King County area. The Kenmore Bothell Interfaith Group is one of our main partners, as well as the Prince of Peace Lutheran Church, Ronald United Methodist. We've worked with HopeLink, and we're really excited as neighbors being close to the International Community Health Services, as well as the Therapeutic Health Services. I should mention that 3 years ago, Mr. Rob Beam approached Lake City Partners in wanting to expand our relationship with the city of Shoreline. And for the last 2.5 years, we've hired Stanley Machikoto to do direct outreach in Shoreline. So we've really gotten a good snapshot of what homelessness looks like in Shoreline and how urgent it feels to have a North King County solution for folks. So really grateful for you all to be on this call and how we can all work together to end homelessness. I think that is our main goal. Thank you. Want to introduce Kevin McGuire, who is our staffer. He will be our program director for the shelter. He has showed great experience and in supporting people and walking alongside, and I just I have lots of confidence in him and his ability, so I want to introduce him.
Hi, I'm Kevin McGuire. I am the program manager or director for Lake City Partners. Very under the weather, so apologize about the hoarseness. Thanks for what everybody shared. It feels really nice to be here. I'm very excited about this opportunity here in Shoreline. I'm a Shoreline resident, homeowner in Shoreline. Super happy that this is happening here. I have a little bit of a different take on all this stuff. I'm a frontline worker, so I work in direct services with people, and my job is to build relationships with people experiencing homelessness. And like most people who are doing the frontline work, I have lived experience. And so I'm about 20 years removed from my own stint of being unhoused. I was able to be like the success story that had a great career, had, family, kids, learned how to play golf, all that. And like I said, like most people that do frontline homeless services, I have that lived experience, which is just so crucial into breaking down those barriers of lack of trust and the paranoia and all the things you can imagine. If I can share my personal experience with people and off line here out of this meeting, I'm happy to talk with neighbors and anybody else about that whole journey. It's a long one. But it's proven to be super successful for me, and it enables me to have that empathy and understanding and do that real person first, housing first approach and mean it. And they know that I mean it, and we can trade war stories and talk about all the things and bond like that. And so my job in the winter shelter for the past few years has been to well, the day I took it, I envisioned, us having the year-round model. And that was my goal from day one, was to get us into a position where we had this. And I've been working on models and programs and for the last 2.5 years to be ready for this opportunity. And my job is people managing at the end of the day. And I manage and I hire and I train and I manage staff. I train volunteers, which is another thing we'll talk about tonight about just our overwhelming volunteer support. Goes to the kind of grassroots movement out of the North cities, because so many people want to help, and we have been able to build that option for people to actually help, to cook meals and to do all of that. But yeah, my expertise in my career before coming to Lake City Partners was managing projects and doing lots of hiring and managing people. And so what my job is to identify the people who are a good fit to do this work beyond just the want to, but the actual get to, and put them in a position to be super successful in developing a relationship with clients. And then all of the interpersonal relationships and how volunteers and staff and neighbors and community groups. And so I manage all of that. No big deal. And that's what my job is. I have had some really great experience with community efforts over the last 15 years. We put on breakfasts in Capitol Hill, and we had community groups coming in, and we would, serve 200 people. And so that's where I got my start in kind of community organizing. And it's been, no different with Lake City Partners, is that we have about 52 congregations who support us and other nonprofits. And part of all of that, like melding of relationships, goes to this, principle of the combined effort of the community, and not just having solo agencies working alone. Is that we invite everybody in. Other agencies, North Helpline, just to name one, but the community groups and the ministries and all the people, just putting them all together and identifying everybody's strengths to pull something like this off. And I think we're uniquely positioned to do very well here with our approach and our model and how we like to run shelters. And yeah, I think that was 5 minutes. Am I introducing somebody?
No, Kevin, actually, you're off the hook. We'll be coming back to you, though, with questions. But thank you for the introduction. I know we're going to want to know more about your model and how you're planning to operate this, because I think one of the concerns we'll hear from the community, and that we've already heard from the community, is to understand what exactly this potential future neighbor is. What's going on inside, but how will it, manifest itself outside? And that's part of what we'll address today. And in fact, I know people have started to use the Q&A function. We see questions flying, and I know there's some folks who have hands up, and we will start going through audience questions here in just a couple of minutes. However, there have been about 6 questions that we've identified that have been asked by a lot of people. And so for the sake of efficiency, and you may find your question gets asked, which would be great, and you take your hand down and we can move on. But if you don't hear your question here in the next 6 questions, then please use the Q&A or use the hands up thing, and we'll get to those questions tonight. But these are questions we've heard, and they're not softball questions. These are very real questions we're hearing from the public, and we thought we'd start with these to get the ball rolling on the Q&A front. So I'll start with you, Colleen, on question number 1. Is this shelter a done deal?
No, the shelter's not a done deal. I think both you and I have mentioned, and I will just reiterate that in order for the shelter to go forward, the council would have to take action allowing the use of shelter to take place on this property. And that's related to the current zoning that would have to be addressed through interim development regulations. And just again, by way of reminder, the first discussion, public discussion with the council of that issue will be October 12th. And currently action on that issue is scheduled for October 26th. And it will rest on those evenings what the outcome will be.
Thank you. So just as a reminder, because I know some people have joined late, we are just going through some top questions here, and then we'll get into question and answer. The initial presentations from all of the panelists tonight, if you missed any of that, this proceeding is being recorded, and we will get this posted on the Shoreline, City of Shoreline website as soon as we're able to, within the next few days or next week. So stay tuned if you need to go back to get anything that you've missed. So second question, and Mark, I'd like to throw this one to you. We've heard this term low barrier shelter, and what does that mean? And also, we've heard concerns about sex offenders. How does that get addressed?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So we do use the term low barrier a lot, and there ends up being a fair amount of concern about that. I think, as I mentioned, and I think Kevin mentioned as well, I think one of the goals, or the goal really among our shelter system, is to get people to come indoors. We know ultimately that people living outside, as Melanie mentioned, they don't have good health outcomes. They're exposed to violence and to other conditions. So what we really try to work with all of our shelter providers is to create an environment where people are welcome, an expectation where people can come indoors, they can seek services, they can seek rest, frankly, and then ultimately have a connection, as Kevin talked about, which I think is the beginning of the way that people begin to address their homeless condition. Homelessness looks different for almost every single person. There are unique circumstances for people who, for almost every single person who lives homeless in our community. And it starts with a welcoming environment. It starts with a place where people feel like they can come in and not be judged. Where people can come in and begin to find that connection. Ultimately, homelessness is a loss of connection to family or to community, to employment. And so we really try to have a shelter system that is welcoming for folks and where they're able to build their own community among the people who stay there. Shelters are behavior-based. Low barrier shelters are behavior-based, which means that you can't simply do whatever you want in a shelter, that there are ground rules that I think Melanie and Kevin can talk about, but that if people are able to abide by those ground rules, that they are able to be a part of the community that is a shelter, that then they are welcome in that shelter and to begin to engage in how they can address whatever condition it is that has been keeping them outside or on the street. As far as sex offenders go, I would say that's just frankly an extension of what I mentioned on the low barrier. We ultimately want an environment where people are able to come indoors. And so whether it's a sex offender or it's a different formerly incarcerated individual, either of whom may have justice system requirements on them, as long as they're able to meet those expectations from the corrections and the justice system, as long as they're able to have their behavior comply with the way the shelter is designed to be operated, that they are participating in the shelter program. Again, I think the point is that it's better to have those folks indoors, living in a place where people know where they're at, where, whether it be law enforcement or emergency, other emergency systems know where those people are. Ultimately, shelter and having those people be able to indoors, I think is the preferred approach there. So that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you. And I've got one more for you before we move on, Mark. And that's really just what about funding? Who is paying for this, and where's the money coming from?
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit at the start, but I can provide a little more context. The county spends, a lot of money every single year operating a shelter system, and those exist from those dollars come from existing sources that could be things like a voter-approved levies that we have, or property tax, other property taxes, or sales taxes. Additionally, we partner both with the state Department of Commerce, typically, as well as the federal government to take those state and federal dollars in and use those to support our shelter system. So we have the sources now to support this shelter from existing tax and other revenue sources, and certainly expect to be able to support this shelter to be successful.
So that you mentioned this Department of Commerce grant. What is that? What is that going to be used for? Is that to operate it?
Yep. So the State Department of Commerce grant, we actually applied for a number of additional shelters throughout the county to expand our system for a lot of the reasons that Melanie talked about. But the shelter grant from the State Department of Commerce actually can be used for both the operating support, which we know is an ongoing component that we will continue to shoulder with our other partners, as well as portions of the capital improvements that need to be made to the space. I think the thing that's exciting about the Oaks is that it lays out great for the kind of shelter that we are looking to evolve to, meaning individual rooms that are very respectful of people, where they're able to find rest in that space. The Oaks lays out really well in most ways for that. There are some changes that we will need to work with Lake City partners to make in that space. We'll be able to use the Department of Commerce funds to help do that.
Thank you. I appreciate those answers. So now, Kevin, I'm going to turn to you for the next couple of questions. We've heard some talk about ground rules. We've heard some talk about how if you bring people inside, there's an opportunity for people to be held accountable for their behavior. And I think those are interesting things. But I think a couple of the specific concerns we've heard within that subject area relate to drugs and alcohol. Are drugs and alcohol going to be allowed to be used in the facility? Or what about if residents of the shelter are using them out in the neighborhood? Can you speak to those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the second one first. The using drugs or drinking out in the neighborhood would fall under the guest agreement, and so there would be action taken. That's just part of the expectation of people who are in the program. I'll try to look at the camera. Yeah, so that it's not allowed, essentially. And then the first question, no, there is no drugs and alcohol used in the shelter. Probably something important to note is that what we've done in the past and what we do is we identify the guests or the people who are in our shelters who may have substance abuse problems, which is not everybody. And we start those conversations with them from a really non-judgmental kind of stance, and we just open an invitation to have those conversations. And we've been successful in getting people into treatment every single year. We have people who are turning around after becoming sober and coming back to be volunteers with us. We have one this year that's coming to be a volunteer with us. We get plenty of people into detox. And so if somebody's coming in and it's obvious that they have those problems, we turn directly to a solution for them. So hopefully that helps.
Maybe you could put a little more context here. You referenced a guest agreement. What does it mean? I mean, so take us through sort of how a person would come in and how you set up expectations. And especially, I think, from a neighbor's standpoint, how is that going to be something that helps them think that it's not just rules inside the building, but outside the building?
Absolutely. And it all starts with an intake process. A lot of this is going to be referrals. So the expectations are going to be starting from the outreach, essentially. Outreach workers are going to be explaining the program to them, expectations of the program. So before they even get to our program, they're going to have an idea that there is going to be some standards and some expectations. And so we'll have our intake process the minute somebody comes into the door. And part of that intake process is, filling out paperwork to create HMIS profiles, which is Homeless Management Information Systems profiles. It is an opportunity to link resources for them and caseworkers and shelter, just to create kind of a map for them and an ability to communicate with, say, a case manager or the people at the day center, so we can all message each other through their profile. And then we'll sit down and we'll go through line by line our guest agreement, and they will sign each line. And it's a standard that's just, it's non-negotiable. I mean, everybody makes mistakes, and everybody deserves to be treated fairly. So you can't expect perfect form every time, but it's really, our philosophy is we're inviting people in here to take ownership, and the guest agreement gives them the standards to which to operate by. And so it becomes an understanding for them, this is how we function here. And they'll police each other. If somebody is getting out of line or saying something sideways, then, the guests will probably intervene before staff does, because they are taking ownership of the space. Even in a winter shelter with mats on the floor, they still are the ones cleaning up and policing the grounds. And so we invite that in, we invite that ownership for people. And the guest agreement, if you make a mistake, you'll get a warning, and then after that, you'll have more severe consequences.
So it doesn't sound like the kind of place, if I wanted to just find a place to crash, but not necessarily improve or deal with my issues. It doesn't sound like yours is the right fit for me if I'm that kind of person.
Unless you're willing to have a conversation about, turning things around, and then you are, I mean, we take every outreach opportunity seriously and capitalize on the opportunities where we can. And there's surprising outcomes that happen even from, unlikely situations. But yeah, I mean, but typically I hear your point, and typically, yeah, we won't be that place for people. And our standard has been, we can't help everybody. So if you can't operate within our guest agreement, then this isn't the place for you. And it's not we're not shooing people away. We're just admitting that we can't help everyone. And then we will defer them to possibly another shelter that can fit their needs.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to keep you on the hot seat here for a minute. John, I think we have an aerial photo of the facility. We're going to do a screen share here, so that anybody who is watching this on a computer or other device will be able to see an aerial photo. For those of you on a phone, this may be a less meaningful moment, but what we're going to be showing is an aerial photo of the facility. And thank you, John, for putting that up. And Kevin is going to speak to sort of the plan for security and how you're going to keep neighbors safe, and how you're going to, help maintain a safe and healthy community while operating this facility. And one reason we brought this up is I know Kevin had, there's some features that Kevin could point out, and I think there might be security measures or cameras. So I'm just going to turn it back to you, Kevin, and to the degree it's possible for you to sort of visually walk people through this, that would be great. Can you talk about sort of safety and security plans here?
Yeah, I can. And the good news is the security is already in place, and what we are going to do is we're going to add on to that for better measures. I think one of the most important things for security is that our staff will be rotating, walking not only inside the building, but outside of the building as part of the responsibilities. So that's every 30 minutes or 45 minutes, we'll have a staff person walking around the building And if you look into the middle of the property, you'll see that we have gated courtyards. And so it's a fantastic opportunity to invite people to do their walking inside of the facility. So I expect that most of the action will happen there. Like I said, the security systems are already in place and we're going to add to it. You're looking at Aurora here on the east side and you see the great big parking lot there. Well, we have 4 security cameras in that entryway where the that cursor is running right now, and that has full field of vision through the whole parking lot, even onto the sidewalk and the bus station. And we'll be adding a few cameras to basically do the exact same thing in the alleyways, going west on the north side of the building and south, and then and from the south back east. So all of those alleyways and kind of blind spots that are there now are going to have recorded cameras. So we'll be able to record things for 30 days. And then inside of the building, all of the hallways and kind of staff areas and the courtyards too have really good security cameras in place. And we have the original installers that are kind of working on the new developing project here. And so we're partnering with the people who did the original system now, and they're doing a great job of helping us identify, you know, what are the blind spots. And so we're covering all those bases.
And so presumably you'll be monitoring these video feeds?
Yes, that's right. And so there'll be a main kind of console for all video, and then individual staff stations will have their sections of videos. So it's kind of, you know, it's everybody's got eyes on these monitors. And I guess another important thing to note is that the back parking lot, so if you're looking, where the cursor is here now, the gravel driveway across the alleyway, that will have very good, we'll have a good field of view on that with a newly installed security camera for that northwest quadrant. So we'll be able to actually watch what's going on in that parking lot there.
So, and then how about just access and egress? Are people going to be able to go in and out of back doors, or is it just front doors? How are you going to do that?
Yeah, it's all front doors. I mean, the only other doors that people are going to be allowed to go out of if they're not staff is the courtyard. And so we're really going to encourage people. We'll have kind of canvas, we'll have tents out there for people who smoke or, you know, want to stay out of the rain. So we'll have some covering out there for them. But the only guest entrance is through that front lobby, which is on that east side of the building by the main parking lot.
So they can't just nip out the back for a quick whatever. It's all going to be through a visibly observed sort of front door.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you can imagine, we've been operating out of churches, which aren't, you know, the easiest to manage, and we've gotten really good at just encouraging guests who are with us to kind of help us out and follow these rules, and we've gotten really good at identifying if there's any weak spots and kind of nipping any problems in the bud pretty fast.
This is fantastic. I know there'll probably be more questions, Kevin, but we'll let you go for a minute. Mark, I'm going to come back to you before we open it up to questions from the larger community. You had mentioned that King County has set up shelters all across the region. So you've had some experience with shelters coming into neighborhoods in circumstances akin to this, I would imagine. What can you tell me about what the neighborhood experience is, particularly in terms of things people would worry about, crime or what have you?
Yeah, and I think your characterization is right, Jim. We have been working kind of throughout the county to set shelters up. I think, whenever there is a shelter that comes into a community, whether it's in Seattle or in, Auburn, or pick your community, Bellevue, we're working on a shelter right now. There is often a lot of concern from the community, and that's okay. I think we see people living on the street, and I think that it's hard to know what those folks are going through. And I think there's a natural sort of concern about what those folks are going to bring to the community. I think what we have experienced, I can get into a little specifics here too, though, is that ultimately when a shelter starts to operate in the community, our shelters, by and large, and I think it would be hard to point to one that tend to be very good neighbors. I can speak to one that we're operating in White Center. We just started operating a shelter in Lower Queen Anne in Seattle. Because our shelter operators are professional, because they are strong providers of social services, that they see the community that surrounds their shelter as partners in the success, that ultimately there isn't a lot of friction or ultimately a lot of realized fears from that. I think even more to that point, a few things to kind of build on there, Jim. One is that this is going to be a 24/7 shelter operation. I think that has been clear to us as the county has supported more and more 24/7 shelters, that truly is a best practice, that this shelter becomes the home for these folks while they are becoming grounded, addressing their housing barriers, and that is how they see it. Kevin pointed that out. Folks create a sense of community in that shelter. And really see it as a place where they want it to be successful. They want to be successful members of that community and that neighborhood. And I think they also see it as something for themselves to protect and ensure is successful. So I think that's kind of one thing I would touch on. Second, I already commented, I think we have skilled shelter operators throughout the county. Lake City Partners is one of those. And so Kevin did a good job of explaining sort of what professional operations will look like. There will always be somebody on staff. There will be people to respond to concerns from the community, to concerns from people who are in the shelter. And I think that is really important. And I think, this meeting that the city of Shoreline is really a testament to. The city of Shoreline is committed to the success of this. And I think ultimately so is the county. And so I think we see this all as a partnership opportunity and a place where we will ensure that the shelter meets its obligations, and ultimately, and I think this is really the most important part, is successful for the people who are coming into that shelter. I think it's important, and this came up in the conversation that we've had with the community leaders group last week, most of the people who will reside in the shelter are among the most vulnerable people in our community. These are people who live on the streets, who and really are just seeking a place of quiet, of rest. And we have seen having a place where people are able to do that have profound benefits for folks. And so I think that's what I expect and anticipate this shelter to be. And I know that Lake City Partners will be able to operate it in a way that ensures that the folks who are in that space are successful, and that it's a successful neighbor to the community.
Thank you, Mark. Colleen, was there something you wanted to add, or shall we move on?
No, I think that's good for now. Thank you.
All right, terrific. Thank you. So, Polly, it's back to you here for Zoom. We're going to turn things over now to folks in the audience who have questions. I'll turn it over to Polly. We'll bring them up and we'll get them answered.
I'll just do a brief refresher for those of you who may not have been here at the beginning of the meeting with instructions on how to ask questions. So if you're on a tablet, a smartphone, or a computer, you can ask questions, as many of you have already done, by typing in your question into the Q&A icon and clicking send. And we will, staff are monitoring those questions and answering them either written or we will try to get to them and answer verbally. On all your devices, you can also raise your hand to be put into a queue to ask questions, electronically raising your hand, that is. So if you're on a tablet, smartphone, or computer, there is a hand icon. Go ahead and click on that hand. And if you want to lower your hand for some reason, you can just click on it again and that hand will disappear. If you dialed in tonight by phone, dial *9 and that will raise your hand on my list and put you in the queue as well. When I call on you, I will call your name, and then there will be a message on your screen that asks you to unmute yourself to be able to talk. Or if you're on your phone, you'll hear an audible message that asks you to dial *6 to unmute yourself. And so Jim, we have about 11 people with their hand raised on my list. And so I will start with 3 of those, and then I'll hand it back to you and Eric and John, and we can go to some of the written questions and keep going back and forth. I think some of the written questions are also people who are in the hand raised list. So we may cover both and as we go.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, so the first 3 people I will be calling on, just so you are ready. Cecily Hudson, Vinay V. Knack, and Barbara Twaddell. So I will go through calling each person in order. So Cecily or Cecile, apologize if I have not called you correctly.
No, that was perfect, a perfect pronunciation, which is very unusual.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
I don't really have a question. It was a statement, which is why I had my hand raised. I just want to say that I've been a homeowner in Shoreline for 41 years plus, and I am so excited about the possibility of this shelter coming into our city and showing citizens not as advantaged as we are, that we have a sense of brotherhood and caring for our neighbors, and that whatever problems may arise, that we can work together to solve it. I live only a half a mile from the proposed project, the shelter project, and I know the nearby businesses. I visited friends at the nursing home when it was open, and it really is well suited for this project. And I just want this to be a done deal. I know that there's citizens that are circulating, I would say, untruths that are scary and create fear in people. And I just want to say that I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed that these people in my city would have an unwelcoming nature living in the city of Shoreline. And I hope that this comes through. I'm just very excited about it. So thank you. And you had a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cecily. And I appreciate you taking the time to comment. I will say this, I mean, just to, when you're in a situation that affects your home or your family, those are, for most of us, 2 of the most important things in our lives. It's going to trigger, concern. And it's absolutely true too, that in the absence of clear information, you can leap to conclusions or have worst case scenarios that may or may not be grounded in reality. And part of the goal today is to provide information. So Cecily sort of hit on something here, which is we really want to make sure we hear, what are your concerns? What are you worried about? And we'll try to provide accurate and clear information that speaks to those concerns. We're not looking to necessarily change anybody's mind, but if we can shed light through clear, accurate information, that's what we're here for tonight. So Polly, let's go to the next person.
So the next person I invite to ask a question is Vinay Knack.
Hi, Vinay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First off, I did have a logistical question. I've already posted a few questions on the Q&A chat, and I don't know what the time limit is and how many questions I want to ask, because I do have a long list. I don't want to overwhelm and take up time more than I'm allowed to.
Well, here's what I would say is if anything we can't get to, let's do this. I have an idea, because we're kind of making this up on the fly. Put all your questions on Q&A, and we'll make sure that answers are published in writing to your questions. If you think there's some here that are good for verbal stuff, let's start with those. And let's take a couple of minutes and see what we get through. We want to make sure that everybody who's raised a hand is able to participate tonight. So you could ask a couple questions, let's answer them, and then you'll leave. And then if you want, you can raise your hand again and come back to the back end of the line. But that way we'll be able to, also allow everybody else who's raised a hand to address those questions. How does that sound?
That sounds reasonable. Thank you.
Okay. Shoot.
Okay. So my first point I want to make is, I think as was previously commented upon, there is a need for evidence. And I completely agree that there are pros and cons for making a decision. And so long as there's evidence being presented, we are all for it. The unfortunate reality is that so far we haven't been given any evidence specifically about a low barrier shelter. And typically we have been given references and comparisons of high barrier family shelters and other such facilities, which truly are not comparable. Anything which is temporary, which is rotational on a monthly basis, anything which is for 10 people is not the same as something which is for 60 to 90 people. And not the same as something which houses low barrier, which is set up to be a low barrier shelter. So more power to anybody who is able to provide evidence. We have asked for that through the last 3 or 4 different city council meetings, but we haven't received any yet. And even through today's call, we only got hand wavy information and nothing specific. So moving on, I do want to ask for 3 specific questions. What is Lake City Partners' specific history and experience running permanent low barrier shelters? And again, history and experience running permanent low barrier shelter. The second question is, between all of the examples that were referenced earlier of the guest agreement, who will have the onus of tracking the patrons or the guests' behavior outside of the facility? That is, across the neighborhood, there is Richmond Highland Park, which is less than 500 feet away. Would the operators of the facility be policing there, or would Shoreline Police be going there frequently enough? Or is the onus on the actual community members to call up 911 or to call up the operators? And third and my last question for the day, at least for this session, is, sorry, I lost track of this. In the case where patrons are asked to leave the facility, what are the next steps? What if they do not leave the neighborhood? Would the onus and the burden be on the operators? Would the onus and burden be on the community, or will it be on the city of Shoreline?
All right.
What I do want to make as a comment, and I don't know if there's a definite answer there. I don't think security cameras constitutes security. The two are not the same. This security cameras give you evidence of what happens. It does not stop things from happening. So let's at least be factual on some of these concepts, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your input. We appreciate it, and appreciate too the clarity of some of these questions. Now, as I said, we're going to work to provide as much information as we can, and you have 3 clear questions here. So first, I think these really are going to be for Melanie and for Kevin. Speak a little bit to your history and experience with this sort of a low barrier shelter, and what that means. And then in terms of patrons' activities outside of the facility in the immediate neighborhood, there was that notion of how are you aware of, or how do you kind of know what's going on, I guess, in the neighborhood as it relates to your guests. And then if someone isn't a successful fit for your program, what happens there? Those, I think, are the 3 questions. Melanie, why don't we start with
Right. Yes, I will start. And thank you, Vinay, for your questions. And you're speaking to the need for evidence, how we've been successful. And I just want to say for 2019, we had 124 households exit into housing. They all found permanent housing. Some of those were families with children, and 73 of those households were from the city of Shoreline. I think our outreach person has been really focused on housing in the city of Shoreline. So I just wanted to say that that's some of our evidence that we have been successful at that, ending homelessness, one household, one person at a time. and then to continue on in talking a little bit more about our experience. So we've worked at a number of models since 2007, wanting to figure out what is the best way to offer shelter. And certainly the mats on the floor has been our biggest experience. But we know that the experience of people having their own rooms will all of a sudden already de-intensify the experience for people. So we understand that people are coming into the site having experienced trauma, needing to recover from a lot of different scenarios, experiencing mental health issues, and so all of those things are really important in addressing each person. And so our work is person-centered, working individually with people. And so we've done that through the day center. We've done it through the winter shelter and through our outreach program. Wonder if Kevin can speak more to the guest agreement and tracking outside of the facility. I just want to say though up front, we are committed to and willing to meet with the neighborhood and the immediate neighbors, and also be available for responding to any concerns of the neighborhood. And we will work closely with the police around any identified folks that are in the area that are concerned. But for the most part, I see Aurora being a great opportunity for folks to take the rapid ride to their jobs, to other resources that they might find, but also, you know, be able to walk down to the clinic that's available and take in the other resources in the area.
Thanks, Kevin. I think you're muted.
A lot of mute and unmute going on here. In the past, what we've done is we've helped people that are leaving the facility, leave the facility. We use bus tickets, sometimes to get rides for people. We don't expect to have a lot of people trying to run away from here because it's going to be such a great opportunity for them. And part of, you know, the guest agreement is people are going to want to have to stay in our good graces. So if you're going to lose your opportunity for this kind of stabilization based on, you know, some behavior, you're likely to rein that in. But, you know, it'll be we'll be upfront with people like we always are about how we expect people to act in the neighborhood. But we hand out bus tickets to people. We're right in front of the bus stop. We'll monitor that. If we had an episode and somebody was, you know, having kind of a breakdown or something, we would monitor that situation outside of the facility, and to make sure that they got the help they needed, even if it was like an emergency call for mental health purposes, or, you know, or anything else. So, but I wanted to be specific. If you have identified that there's a park that you're specifically concerned about, we're not above doing a sweep of that. I mean, I think our hope would be that if there was something happening in the park and it's somehow related to our guests, that we would love and expect to hear from the neighbors about that. Yeah, Mark.
Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add a couple of points, and I think, you know, Kevin and Melanie did a good job. I think, and Melanie actually touched on this, I think it's important that we talk about who is going to be in these shelters too. We know across our shelter system, about half the people who are in our shelters work. They have a job. They get up, they get on the bus, they get in their car, they go to work, and then they come back to the shelter. This is an expensive community that we have. Shoreline is an expensive part of that community, and it is hard for folks to earn sufficient funds to be able to live in the community where that we have here. And so I think it's important to note that too. And I just want to touch just briefly on this idea of tracking people. And these are folks who live in our community and have had unfortunate circumstances who have led to their homelessness. They are free to come and go in our community, in our society. There are rules and there are laws that they need to follow, but we don't track people. If there are issues, if a community, if the neighborhood has somebody whose behavior is disruptive, and they're with the shelter, then obviously we will work with the shelter. I'm sure that there will be work with the police to address that piece too. But again, I think we're trying to create an environment here where people are becoming grounded, where people are becoming reconnected to community and reconnected to services. And so I think that is first and foremost kind of what we're taking.
Thank you, Mark. And, I mean, one of the things I heard Kevin say is specifically as it relates to Richmond Highland Park is a willingness to keep an eye on the place. And I don't know, it sounds to me like it might even be an outreach opportunity if there are individuals currently not affiliated with the shelter who are hanging out there or causing concerns in some manner. So, I think this is a dynamic, it's a great question. It's one that we're not going to resolve tonight, but I also heard clearly from Melanie, there's an ongoing conversation to be had here. And I'm hearing very clearly, this is not just a one-time deal, that Lake City Partners is committing to ongoing communication with the neighborhoods, whether it's, and we can get into some specifics later if people are interested, but it sounds like this is the beginning of a dialogue, not the end. So more to come on that. Polly, why don't we look at the next question?
Jim, I think there's two things. One, I want to address something Vinay, I believe was the name mentioned at the beginning, and then he also had a question about referring people who need to leave. So I don't want to lose track of that question.
Oh, thank you.
In terms of the specific answer to the question about sort of what's it like in neighborhoods where an enhanced shelter is, each one is a little bit different because each one has to sort of be catered to the space that's available, to the provider that's available, to the population that's going to be staying there. And so it's I understand the frustration about not being able to get really specific information. We're not trying to hedge. We're just trying to say that I've done a lot of calls to try to get a handle on this question. And each program is a little bit different. So I think what's difficult is that it's difficult to prove a negative. So for the 1,900 shelter beds that Mark's talking about, most of them around where those shelter beds are happening, the community is not seeing significant community impact in terms of neighborhood problems and increased crime. Mostly that's not happening. We have seen references in articles to some places where those things have happened, are happening, and I think those communities, those specific situations have to be dealt with that in mind. I will say, I know the expectation from our council here and our police would be, if that happens at this facility, if this turns into a facility that's very problematic, that's not going to go unchecked. We're not going to do something about that. It's not what we expect. It's not the experience that we've seen from Lake City Partners' work in their shelter experience so far. But it's we can't point directly to something exactly the same because each one is a little bit different. I do want to correct the statement that there'd be 60 to 90 people here. The maximum number of people that would be at this shelter is 60, and the starting number of people would be half or less than that as the shelter ramps up and sort of gets its sea legs and works things out with both the folks that are staying at the shelter and the surrounding community. So I just wanted to address that, and then I think back to Kevin or Melanie for people that need to be referred elsewhere, if you could be more specific about how that works. I think that was the other question.
Before you get to that, Colleen, one last point that I'd like you to speak to. The council action you referred to here in October is a temporary action. It's 6 months, correct? And then it would have to be renewed. And therefore, there's a check-in point 6 months down the road to really assess how this project's going. Is that a correct statement?
Exactly so.
Okay. So on a person who might have to leave the facility, it's not working out, not a good fit, maybe a bit of a headache. I don't know. Do they just go? Do you just push them to the front door and wave them goodbye, or what happens?
I'm getting the hang of it. No, I think we'll do everything we can to work with somebody. We're not into pushing people into the street for behavior. We're trained. We're trained in de-escalation techniques. We're trained in mental health first aid, trauma-informed care. Like we know what we're looking at and what we're dealing with. So in a situation like this, I think the hope would be if a relationship isn't working out and it's obvious that that we would identify maybe a better opportunity for somebody off of the shelter list. Maybe there's another program that might work. So we would help them identify that and then give them some means to get there. But I envision, we're able to get through the night with people. And if we're not, then we call, some first responders that have mental health training. I mean, that's the big thing, right? That's the big thing. Sometimes people are having a break or something like that, and they need some help. That's how we would do that.
All right, thank you. So Polly, let's go on to our next raised hand.
All right, so next I am calling on Barbara Twaddell. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. And then after Barbara's asked her question and it's been answered, we'll go to some of the written questions and then come back to the raised hands.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, can you hear me?
Hi, Barbara, yes.
Hi, yes. So I want to bring up the elephant in the room, and that is that the center has to be welcoming of drug addicts. You're not able to screen them out. So my question is about that. And it's about the discrepancy between what we heard from Lake City Partners and the City of Shoreline FAQs. So per Lake City Partners, quote, we follow the harm reduction theory, which allows for a tapering of drug use through pharmaceuticals and is overseen by their medical providers. But there's no usage of illicit drugs at our shelters. If that happens, that person is not a good fit for our program. But per the City of Shoreline FAQs, quote, while not a given that a single violation of drug use or possession will result in eviction, an ongoing pattern of violations will show that an individual is not prepared to work towards housing stability. So my question, what is it? How much drug use will be allowed? Sounds like it will take an ongoing pattern of violations to have a resident removed. How many violations does it take to have an ongoing pattern? 2, 3, 20? All the while exposing the neighborhood to illegal drug use. Because of course they can't do it in the facility. Addicts will get their drugs and they will use them. So how are you going to protect the community? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Barbara. Excellent question. One of the challenges with complex information is it's said in different places by different people, and they may not match up exactly word for word, because we're not trying to just run a single script here and be the Stepford bureaucrats here talking to you tonight about our program. But let's try to reconcile that. Is there a difference between those two statements? And we talk about people who are using drugs. I mean, these are people who would be using drugs as homeless people in the neighborhood. But what happens if you have a person with a substance addiction who comes into your program? How does that handle? And then I think from there, Barbara asked a great question. So maybe Colleen, do you want to speak to the take a first crack at the reconciling of these statements that we're hearing, and then let's turn to our friends at Lake City Partners to talk about the bulk of Barbara's question.
Sure, Jim. I think to your earlier point, I mean, that was, the city staff's effort to understand from the perspective of the providers and reflect our understanding of that, how they would work with people. I really want to defer to Melanie and Kevin, who I think are those are the words you should really hear and trust in why this meeting tonight is so important, because they are the ones with the experience who can speak directly to what that looks like. So maybe Melanie, you want to start, and then if Kevin needs to add to that, but I think you were quoted in that quote, so maybe it makes sense for you to start.
Sure. So I want to say that community safety is the most important thing. And so we're encouraging folks to behave within that parameter, that ideal of creating safety for everyone. And so that's our bottom line, I think. And then we offer person-centered care where people are at, in encouraging people to think about drinking less, using less, and that's the harm reduction approach. I think the behavior-based model is just so critical. If we're creating safety for folks, then we can feel like we can be in relationship at this point. Kevin, do you want to say more, please?
Yeah, I'd just go back to our guest agreement about use of illegal drugs and alcohol on site or in the neighborhood. It's not tolerated, and there isn't 20 chances or 3 or 4. I think because we're person first, if somebody has shown great promise and they've done good work and they've really stabilized, we will work with somebody to give them a second chance. But we're not interested in enabling, toxic behavior, and so we would find another place for them to be. So.
And frankly, if other people are in recovery, having a user right in the midst of your facility is not healthy for the rest of the folks who are staying there, right? So it's not in anybody's interest to allow that. Is that a fair statement? I get some nods. Okay. All right, so thank you very much for that answer. John, I'm going to turn to you. Polly had suggested we look at what's coming in through the Q&A. Are there any questions you can roll up from us off of those off the Q&A?
Yeah, we've received a whole number of questions, so thank you for those folks who are typing questions in. A number of questions have come in. Questions started coming in right away, so a number of questions I believe have been addressed. One thing I do want to mention to everyone is every question that does come in, we'll be adding those to our frequently asked questions, and those was referenced earlier. So we will make sure to be answering all of those questions in writing, even if we don't have an opportunity to answer those real time tonight, which is likely the case given the volume. A couple of questions that I think would be helpful to answer now. One question about gender, so men and women, children, so kind of the makeup of the demographics of those guests that would be able to stay in the shelter. Another question, and so some of these are very the kind of nitty gritty or specific questions. Are there bathrooms in the rooms? Will rooms be able to lock? And so I'm going to just throw a couple at you, hopefully, and it's probably to Melanie and Kevin, if you can answer those. Number of staff as well that are going to be on site at any given time, kind of the ratio to staff to guests. And then, all right. And then that's good enough for now. I got a couple more, but so please jump back to me if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of this species of operational questions. So, what's the gender breakdown? What's the staffing ratio to that? How's it going to work with people, privacy and locked doors or bathrooms and things like that? And maybe it's really an entry into a larger question of the environment that you're seeking to create inside this facility. So we'll turn it over to you, Melanie and Kevin, to answer.
Yeah. So about the facility questions, there'll be no locked rooms or ability to lock the doors in the rooms. Some of the rooms have bathrooms. Some of them just have sinks. So there'll be a couple areas in the building where people will kind of have communal bathrooms. All the showers will be done on kind of a sign up basis. Staffing, we're looking at about 5 staff for the 52 beds at a minimum, and then 6 staff at a minimum, and then the overnight staff would be 4 people after lights out. During the day, you'll have your case managers, your housing navigators, your program director, and staff. So the daytime is going to be a really great opportunity to do all that that work with case management. I'm forgetting another one.
How about Jen?
Yeah, the facilities for single adults. There is no children.
But adults means male or female.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And Jim, just to clarify too, that the rooms are intended to be single rooms unless people show up together and ask to be housed together. And again, this is a little bit of a COVID safety measure.
Okay, thank you. John, did we cover that first flight of questions from you?
You did. A couple more that I've seen multiple attendees ask. How long typically would someone stay in the shelter? And is one question. And then another one about other successful shelter models. So if there's any other continuous stay or kind of 24/7 shelters that we could point to that would say, hey, this has been a successful model, maybe elsewhere in the county. So that may be a good question for Mark.
All right. Length of stay, maybe Lake City, you can do that. And then Mark, maybe you can speak to the second one.
Yeah, length of stay is really, it's relative based on performance. So if somebody's been in this shelter for 3 months or even 6 months, but they're, clearly working very hard on their plans, we're not going to destabilize them. So there's no hard date set as of yet, but that is in process to figure out, what are good timelines to support people. There's been talk of, 3 to 6 months for people. Our winter shelter, we operate for 5 to 6 months, and we'll have 10 people kind of last that whole year, and then rotate a lot of people throughout the year. And it's just really based on their housing options and what their prospects are.
Great. And Mark?
Yeah, so I think the way that I understood that question was, maybe I'll answer it 2 ways. So I wasn't quite sure if it was other places that we operate 24/7 shelters or other shelter models other than 24/7 shelter. I can do both.
Mark, I think it was more other shelters similar to how this shelter would be operated that we'd point to as kind of a successful model for this shelter.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think, the 24/7 shelter model, frankly, is relatively new for the county. And I would say generally nationally as a model that we've been working towards. Places where we are, and some of it has been recently operational because of the COVID restrictions, moving people to a 24/7 type operation really helps keep people safe in that type environment. So we have a number of 24/7 shelters that operate in the city of Seattle. One that I would point to as being particularly successful is a shelter that we opened on a 24/7 basis in a portion of the King County Jail downtown. And this actually is a shelter that takes clients from the Downtown Emergency Service Center. That was one of the first places that we looked to operate a 24/7 shelter. It became within the shelter staying community, it became the most popular shelter in our system. It also was a place where we see very few interactions with law enforcement and EMS. And I think DESC, who is a very long-term operator of shelter, really points to the fact that it's relatively relatively small for a shelter. I think there are about 40 people who stay there, not that dissimilar from what the Shoreline facility is proposed to be, that you're able to provide really a level of intense interaction with folks like Kevin described. So when you have, 40 or 50 folks and you've got 5 or 6 people on site at all times, you're able to build that relationship with folks. And I think that really has pointed to the success in that space. And I think ultimately people come and go all the time from that space, but it is a strong sense of community. And I think people frankly would be struck by, and I would say this about, many shelters, including the shelter that I spent the weekend working in. We operate for the Clean Air Over the Smoke. Shelters are remarkably quiet environments, and they are very calm. That the shelter that DESC operates, to walk in, it is, even for me who spent a fair amount of time in shelters, I'm struck by how calm and quiet they are. Other places where those are operated, we've been working with Bellevue and their shelter that is in Lincoln Center, and that has been operating on a continuous basis now for a while, and that's right down in the city of Bellevue. And then we have been working with operations in single room settings like the one that we're looking at the Oaks, in SeaTac and in Redmond, or in, sorry, not Redmond, Renton.
And it sounds like it's been somewhat of a revelation in terms of the experience that the homeless individuals might have, and how well they might actually find their way to getting some help for some of their challenges.
Yeah, I think that's right. What we've heard from the operators is that where they've known people for years who have gone, who've been part of an overnight shelter system. I mean, shelter operators, and Kevin, I'm sure can speak to this, you really begin to know the people who are the stayers in your shelters, even though they do move on to housing, you begin to have that relationship. They've seen people who they've known for a long time who have cycled through their shelters really open up. They've had examples of people really take up much more healthy activities. There's examples of folks who are routinely exercising now, who are engaging in case management in a way that has not been either possible or desired. And I think they really attribute it to the fact that there's frankly more time spent with those individuals, and that people have a sense of privacy and a sense of their own space that frankly you do not have when you are living unsheltered on the street. You never have that, and so your desire to open up really goes down. And I think having a shelter that operates that way really provides a pathway to success.
Okay, thank you. So Polly, let's go back to raised hands and see who's next on our list.
All right, so the next 3 people that I'll call on in order, first will be Shabha Jathaprakash, Dave 722710, and Brian Berg.
All right.
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Shaba, and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So thank you again for letting us ask questions. I'm going to follow a similar model to what Vinay did. Ask 3 questions, and hopefully we can cover some of the other questions that I have later point of time. I do want to get back to Melanie's comment first, and I would like to ask some clarification questions there. From what I understand from the Lake City Partners website, you have 2 types of models. One is the winter shelter and one is the day center. And the winter shelter opens from November to March timeframe. And this is in affiliation with churches, where I couldn't find further information on what are the rules and regulations that they follow. I'll come to my question here, which is also what Vinay asked. Is there specific background and experience in running a low barrier permanent shelter? Could you help me specifically understand what are the successes of such a facility and how they have been helping patrons find permanent housing? This is not just stemming from our concerns regarding your organization, but generally from other organizations who have also gone by the low barrier and permanent shelter model specifically. So that's my first question. Second question is, what are you doing specifically to make this low barriers facility successful? And this comes from multiple such examples that we've seen, such as the Clement Place in Seattle, which also has a low barrier permanent shelter setup. The neighborhood who have actually provided multiple comments, both publicly and on this forum, have mentioned that there is no specific response to all the issues that they're facing in that neighborhood. They're actually, one of the public commenters who came onto our forum and provided evidence and concerns have been saying that this is not a model that's successful. So we would love to understand how this particular facility is going to be different. There's also evidence around Clark County in Washington, similar model, which has currently been closed as well. My third question, and hopefully the last one for now, is if and when the shelter runs out of capacity, how do we plan to manage guests who are waiting to be admitted but do not have a bed just as yet? This is mostly towards the city and the council, where I'm trying to understand if there are encampments and tents that comes across all of the Aurora Avenue and within the neighborhood, the parks around the area, and these are specifically not guests of your shelter. How do we ensure that they do not jeopardize the safety and security of the neighborhood around? Thank you.
Well, thank you for all those questions. Really appreciate that. And they're good ones. I will say, just on that last question, I do think you're right. That's a good one for City of Shoreline, and I'll have Colleen speak to that in a minute. But for the other two, really, it's like, what are the low barrier shelter models here, and then what is Lake City? What are you guys going to do to make this successful? And there were some examples offered up there by our caller who, and I didn't quite catch what facility this was, but it sounds like there are some that have not worked. And do you learn from those? What do you do? And how are you going to make this one work? So I think those are great things. Now, one thing I notice is there's this question of low barrier in this phrase. And we addressed it a little bit at the outset, but I would perhaps come back to that. Really, what does that mean, and how does that interact with what you're actually doing in your operations? So let's tackle that first, Melanie and Kevin, and then we'll go to Colleen for that third question.
Sure. Thank you. Just, even for visiting our website and wanting to know more about who Lake City Partners is. And we did get started with a day center. And so that is something, that is just operating during the day. And I think the biggest barrier has been funding for the North King County area. There has been a lack of resources for our area. So we were trying to pair a place for people to go during the day, and then especially in winter, a place for people to sleep as kind of a survival strategy. And both of those programs we've offered as low barrier, and that is to ensure that anyone that is motivated to come inside and engage in community and in relationship has an opportunity to come inside. And so they come in the door, and then that's where the real opportunity for success lies, in building that relationship. So we're really relationship based in establishing that connection with people to really understand their story, where they're coming from. And part of the exploration, and this is a best practice, is the exploration of diversion, or the work of diversion. So diversion is a model where we explore where folks slept the night before. So maybe they were with friends or family the night before, rather than sleeping rough on the street. And so then we suggest, well, is there a way that we can support you in returning to your friends and family? And maybe there's, just some conflict there that can be ironed out. But we also, sometimes find that people have family members in another place in the United States. They may be from Kansas and have family members there. And so then we offer funding to help people get a bus ticket back to those places where there is an opportunity for a permanent housing site. But United Way has offered a Streets to Home flexible fund program, and this is where we've seen our most success. Africa Town also has offered flexible funds that really help with when people are able to identify housing, that we're able to help with first and last month's rent. And so that's where our last year, 124 households were able to get into housing because of our access to those flexible funds, and that's where we've really seen success. And so the housing first model is getting people in the door, and that really is helpful in that trajectory for making homelessness rare, brief, and one time, that we're working together to come alongside and eliminate those barriers.
So let's go, but thank you, Melanie. Let's go back for a minute to talk about that term low barrier then, and sort of how that rates in. And Colleen, I noticed that you unmuted. So why don't you speak to that here?
Yeah, thank you. This is just coming from a conversation I've had with a couple different shelter operators that I've reached out to, kind of to try to better understand the issues that are related to this question. And first of all, I want to say specifically, I think to Shava's question, Melanie, it's fair to say that Lake City Partners has not yet managed a continuous stay 24/7 facility. Is that fair to say? So I think, just to be clear, I think people are trying to get an answer to that question. That's not something that you have done. However, I do believe that the population, you have a lot of experience with the population in your winter shelter, that is going to be the same population, because they are people that have been experiencing homelessness in North King County that you've been serving. My understanding from talking to Stanley, who's the housing outreach specialist that's affiliated also with Lake City Partners, is he was excited about the opportunity to have more access during the day to work with people, because the challenge when people are just there overnight, obviously, is that they need to sleep. And so it's difficult to do the case management work with people who only are coming in, from 8:30 at night to whatever time in the morning. And so he was really feeling like it's such an increased opportunity for the service enriched approach that you've been talking about, just in terms of access to people. So that was one thing I wanted to say, because I think that people have been asking, trying to get a clear answer to that question. In terms of low barrier, and comparing to other programs, I don't know about Clement Place. I'm not familiar specifically with the Clark County operational model, but talking with a couple of shelter operators here, they pointed out to me that the term low barrier refers to low barrier of access. And so this was what Kevin was addressing earlier, in terms of wanting to be a place that welcomes people in, so that that relationship building and connection that starts the process of engaging in services can happen. There are some programs that operate on a low barrier operational model, where the rules and expectations are not in place the way that Lake City Partners has laid out their intention for this program to operate. So coming back to the guest agreement, the code of conduct expectations, the limitations on the kinds of behaviors that people need to be able to handle in order to remain in the facility, both within the facility, but also in the surrounding community, those in place in all of the programs. Again, makes it very difficult to compare what is planned here in terms of how it's intended to be managed with what might be happening elsewhere, when we don't know those particulars about each and every program. So with that, I would just ask Mark if he knows about either Clement Place or Clark County, and then I'll come back to the other question about other people that might be camping or overflow people.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the Clark County model at all, so sorry about that. Clement Place is actually a permanent supportive housing project, so it's not a shelter. It's on 99 further south in the city of Seattle, and I believe it's operated by the Downtown Emergency Service Center. So different population of folks, and that operates as permanent housing, and is a place where many of those people will live the balance of their lives.
Okay, so before we get back to you, Colleen, on this, just to go back to this idea of low barrier, the alternative to low barrier is high barrier. I suppose there's also a no barrier, but really what we're talking about is a high barrier example would be we would only house people who are sober, right? Or we are only housing people who could achieve a certain level of balance. But let's go with sobriety as an example. So anybody who's actively using would not be able to use this facility. And what I've heard you folks say is that then those are folks who would remain on the street and wouldn't get the engagement that would help them get better and get off the street and maybe get off their substance use as well, right? I think that's, so I just wanted to get that as a clarification in terms of that notion of what it means to be a barrier, because I've also heard that there's still a behavior expectation. Because there can be a perfectly sober person who can be a real pain in the neck, right? And so apart from what is ever in their bloodstream, there's the behavior. Is that a fair statement? Okay. I see some nodding there. So Colleen, you wanted to talk about if it's at capacity, speak to that last question, and then we'll go back to raised hands.
Right. So right now there are occasions when people camp outside in Shoreline, and we are working to develop a more robust response to that situation as best as we can. We do have a policy that prohibits camping in public places in Shoreline. However, we know that it's not the most effective response to just ask the police to go and just tell people they can't be there, they need to go somewhere else, or to ticket them, or to create a cycle of things that don't really help the situation or help the person. And so we've been working with Melanie and Stanley at Lake City Partners to try to be our first line of response for people that we find that are either sleeping in cars or sleeping in tents in Shoreline, with the hope that those folks could engage with Stanley to make a different plan, not just to pick up their tent and go move it somewhere else, but to start to engage in a conversation that would, similar to what Melanie was saying, is there somewhere that you've stayed recently that I could help you get back to? Do you have access to any disability income or anything that could be the foundation of subsidized housing payments, and let me connect you with some other resources that match together could actually get you into housing. It's those kinds of conversations that we're starting to do and would like to build out more completely. One of the resources that could potentially, or is planned to come with this program if it's implemented, is a second outreach specialist. And we have an idea about building out a more robust team that would be even more responsive and work more in partnership still with our police than they even are now. So the interesting thing is that if we do in fact have the shelter, it provides a resource both to Stanley and to our first responders to say, hey, you're sleeping outside here. We've got a facility right in town, because a lot of people are resistant to leaving the community they know. And a lot of people are resistant specifically to going to Seattle. And so if we can say there's a place here, you can have an indoor place, safe that you can leave your things, you can work with people who will help you address these various issues. Can I help make that connection for you? That's a system that we intend to put into place as soon as possible. So ideally, it would mean we will have less people sleeping in tents and in cars in Shoreline than we have now, because we will have a resource to refer people to. So I would not expect to see a surge in those folks in the near term. And if Mark and King County folks do their job, we'll see a decrease in homeless people throughout the county, hopefully going forward. That's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I do, in fact, I would not expect to see a surge in people sleeping outside. I think we would see a decrease of people having to sleep outside.
Thank you, Colleen. So I want to do a time check here. We're in the final quarter of our second hour together, and that gives us a little bit more than an hour that everybody's agreed here to continue to field questions. We have about 20 hands raised, and I would love to see if we could get through all of them. So I'm going to ask the question, but remember, we can always answer written questions. So I would say, if starting with the folks who haven't spoken yet, let's go to them. And I think maybe we should just ask one question each. And let's see what we can get through. And if we get really efficient, then we'll go from there, and we'll spend some more time answering questions. So we got Dave.
Yes, hi, it's actually Carolyn and Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for calling.
Perfect. Well, listen, I really care about the homeless. I volunteered with Search and Rescue. We have a group that helps support Mary's Place. So this is really something that I care a lot about. I'm concerned about this one because what I've read about the low barrier shelters in different areas of Washington State, as well as in other states, and what has typically happened in the areas around these low barrier shelters. So many times you get people in there who can't make it in other kinds of shelters where there's required types of behavior, and there's no background checks. This really, really concerns me because this low barrier shelter is going to be right next to some daycare centers, very close to the high school, right near a couple of parks. These places are filled with kids. Well, if you can't get background checks done, you won't know if you've got sex offenders in there, let alone if you've got people using drugs who will be out there maybe influencing these kids, or worse. How are you going to protect our children by bringing in such a shelter? I've also read that the actual cost to the community has been very high as far as needing more money for all the new police calls when you put a concentration of people with this kind of behavior problems into a neighborhood.
Well, thank you. Was that Carol?
Yes, that's right.
I see the Dave there, and I get that stuck in my mind. But thank you, Carol. I appreciate you taking the time. So there's some real operational questions here. It comes back to this very challenging notion of low barrier, and so these may be people who are still experiencing addiction and needing to act in service of that addiction. I think that's really, and there's this question about how that might have impacts outside the facility. So I throw that back.
To hopefully speak first to this one, I want to reiterate the distinction between low barrier access and low barrier ongoing behavior. And so the notion that there's not rules or expectations for people just really needs to be corrected. So I think Melanie and Kevin have tried really hard to talk about what their expectations will be. And this notion of folks who might be addicted, if that's their primary place in life, and they are not in a place of wanting to address that addiction and actively make steps toward kind of tackling that challenge, then they are not going to be on a path to housing stability, and they're not going to be a good fit for this program. And that becomes a process of helping that person find a different avenue, a different place to be. And so I really just want to try to say that as clearly as possible, so that the notion of low barrier as the term that encompasses all of these assumptions really is not accurate. Low barrier access, if we could think of it in terms of that the point is to help meet people where they are and allow for a space to give people that chance. But as Kevin has said, if they're not prepared to take advantage of that opportunity and really maximize that chance to work toward housing stability, then that's not someone that's just going to stay and do whatever they want in the neighborhood, and that's not going to be good for the program. It's not going to be good for the community inside the shelter or the community outside the shelter. So just really want to try to say that as crisply and clearly as possible, so that as we use that term low barrier, we're really thinking about it in terms of access to the facility.
But so really there is a barrier here that I'm hearing, which is they have to want to be making positive changes in their life. And if they don't want that, they're not a fit for this program. Is that a fair, I'd like Melanie, maybe you or Kevin could answer this. Is that a fair assessment? Would that be a quote unquote barrier here that in fact needs to be surmounted by someone who would stay with you?
I think most folks that we have encountered have been motivated to get into housing. And so we work with that little kernel of wanting to walk in the door and think about the next step for them. And so our motivational interviewing kind of work that we do with people does create that pathway.
You don't get people who say, I love just living rough on the streets. What a great thing. How dare you interrupt me by putting me in housing? You probably don't get that very often.
So the real interest of people, to think about having their own space and privacy again is super motivating for good behavior. So, and I would say again too, our work is preventative. When we're laying out and having that initial conversation, we're being clear on the fact that we don't want people to be camping out in the neighborhood. And that's, just really clear.
Okay, thank you. So Polly, let's go on to the next caller.
So the next caller is Brian Berg, and then after that I will call on Jacqueline Curl. So Brian, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, thank you. Just starting off, I'm a 47-year resident of Shoreline, and we live about a third of a mile from the site. I'd like to start by saying my family and I are not very pleased with the haste in which this whole thing has gone down, and the fact that something's available for real estate and you buy it and you sort of push it through. I feel like this forum may be just a formality and something that's inevitable. So wanted to be heard on that statement. Some of my questions are probably rhetorical at this point because they echo the sentiment of some of the previous speakers in sort of questioning the credentials of Lake City Partners and sort of wondering about examples of permanent shelter that they themselves as an organization have run, and would like to know, do they have examples other than temporary winter shelters at churches, or do we get to be the guinea pigs for this experiment? And if so, what data and what is the source of the data that they can provide us to show the success of those projects? And the last question would be, what is the assurances that are going to be given to nearby residents that if this thing goes sideways, that there will be a plan to mitigate problems? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We've heard already that this is not something Lake City Partners has done before. So maybe the question is more for Colleen or Mark, which is, okay, Lake City Partners, who's had a lot of experience with this population, is now stepping into operating a new model that they haven't personally done before. But maybe you're hiring, maybe Lake City can speak to who they're hiring to do this. But and Kevin, as the manager on the ground, maybe you have experience that would be relevant here apart from the organization. But then for Colleen and for Mark, what are the supports in place? What are the resources to help make sure that this is going to be successful? And then I think Colleen, or maybe even John, as the assistant city manager, could speak to this question of just accountability, and the county as well, Mark. If things don't proceed as planned, what is there for addressing that? That's sort of break glass in case of an emergency moment. So I think this is a fundamental question from this evening and well worth answering. So Brian, again, thank you for that. Melanie, I noticed you unmuted.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, our day center is permanent. It doesn't run 24/7, but it is every week during the day that we are open to folks.
No, thank you. The new model being a 24/7 shelter, but you have not done, and that I don't think that's just a fact. And so getting to, are you bringing in expertise of individual staff members who have that? And then, like I said, for the city and the county, what are the supports in place to ensure success here with this project?
Well, I think I really need to defer to Mark as the primary contractor in terms of the dollars that'll be in the program. But in terms of Shoreline, our investment is to be a good community partner that wants to support the success of the shelter. which rests heavily on this being a good neighbor in the community. So, you know, all the conversations around any kind of neighborhood group that might want to form to help advise or whatever about this, we would try to support that. We obviously will partner closely with our police and build the bridges between those partnerships and Lake City partners and the community if that's needed. So I think we see ourselves as wanting to support this being a successful venture if it goes forward. In terms of contracting accountability, I'll defer to Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that, Colleen. And it's a good question. I think to start with, you know, the county has had a long relationship with Lake City Partners, and I think we've worked with them on numerous contracts over many years that have performance expectations, that have expectations around people who are successfully exiting, whether it's the day center or the overnight shelter. And I think, you know, we've worked with Lake City Partners as programs from, say, the federal government have evolved or from the state government have evolved, and then need to have those reflected in a program. We've worked with Lake City Partners to sort of grow or evolve programs over time. And so I think in Lake City Partners, we see a trusted agency, one who I think has built community trust where they operate now and has partnered well not only with the county but with other service agencies to be successful. I think for this specific case, the county will have, as we do in all of our shelters, we have a contractual relationship, and we will, with Lake City Partners. Again, with expectations around performance, their own, about how the shelter will operate, how people, what sort of programs and assistance folks will have access to. And I think particularly when we are investing, as is the community of Shoreline and the state and others, in a 24/7 operation, real expectations about what are the exits to housing and how people are assisted in that way. So I think we will have that relationship in existence. We will be able to be a supportive conduit to the city of Shoreline, to Lake City Partners to ensure success. You know, and the county has an expectation here as well. And I think people have an expectation on the county. We need to, and we do hold our operators accountable. We do step in and work with operators where there may be issues. And I would say that, frankly, that doesn't happen very often in our programs. And I think we, where there are specific cases where that may happen, we, we may set up weekly phone calls with those operators just to continue to kind of address specific issues that may come up. And I think by and large, we're able to work with our partners and address those.
So one of the things Colleen mentioned, and then we'll move on to the next person with a question. But one of the things Colleen mentioned, and I wanted to just throw this back to Melanie for a final word on this question, which is, she mentioned, engaging the neighborhood and maybe an advisory committee or some other way to maintain communications. Do you want to talk a little bit about neighborhood relations and how you would or could approach these things?
Yes. So our rotating shelter moves through many different neighborhoods, including Shoreline, the Prince of Peace Lutheran Church around that surrounding neighborhood. And so from the beginning of establishing that site with that congregation, we do a neighborhood outreach, and we start to identify who are the community stakeholders in the neighborhood that want to be supportive but also have concerns. And so we go through a process just like we are now to really talk through what are the neighborhood concerns, and if there's need for ongoing relationship and meetings quarterly or monthly, I would be prepared to meet with neighbors that would like to meet more regularly.
You hear talk of community advisory committees, that kind of thing. Just check in and see how things are going. So it's great that you're open to that. Polly, why don't we move on to the next hand raised?
So next we have Jacqueline Curl, and after that it will be Dickie Leonardo. So Jacqueline, go ahead and unmute.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Jacqueline Curley. I'm a 16-year Shoreline resident. My kids actually attend daycare at the daycare that's in close proximity to the proposed site, so I have a personal vested interest both in terms of that care providers like family to us, as well as from more general resident concern about Shoreline as a whole in terms of safety. My other underlying concern is transparency. At the beginning of this discussion, there was a visual shared that did not include the daycare or other child-oriented sites. So I'd like the city to be a little more prominent, and also other partners, in conveying information to the community relative to the plans, and allow for more community involvement to have a better say in the process. So.
Okay. Well, Jacqueline, thank you. I can tell you that graphic was actually something that had occurred to me as we were planning for this, because we just wanted to show the building for sort of security and cameras and stuff. But it's a point well made that it doesn't stand alone. It's embedded in a larger community, and we certainly can speak to those things. I think what Melanie said just a few minutes ago about wanting to meet with key community stakeholders and to continue to have that dialogue moving forward makes a lot of sense. And I think it's safe to say that the city of Shoreline is committed to very much the same thing. So. Is there anything else anybody else wanted to add from the panel, or should we move on to our next hand raised? All right, Polly, who's next?
So Dickie Leonardo, and then after that it will be Heim or Heem. My apologies for mispronunciation.
All right, hi Dickie.
Hi, you can hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Dickie. My wife and I just moved to Shoreline last month. I have first-hand experience about this since I used to live in Seattle, nearby a permanent low-barrier single adult facility for the past 2 years. That was built by DESC that has experience providing shelter since 1979. Since I lived there, the amount of trash that includes used needles, weapons such as knife, is not hygienic, dangerous, and bad for the environment. Their own residents threw away trash from their bedroom windows to the streets. Residents work on their broken cars all day, all night, producing loud driving noise in the middle of the night and often waking my daughter up. Fighting among residents is a daily occurrence, and no matter the time of the day, you can often hear shouting that often result in physical alteration, which then police have to be called. We also see countless overdose, multiple deaths, and fire department coming in multiple times a day. I have personally witnessed both SPD and SFD comes 5 times a day, one day. Since the facility was built, there's an increase of illegal encampment, trash on the street, people get high on the sidewalk, and they throw needles on the walkway. And lastly, one of the residents' car was set on fire at 1 a.m. when it was parked right in front of my house. What will happen if my house caught on fire when my daughter was sleeping? I often report this to the management, and their response is, what is happening outside of their facility is not their responsibility. So the trash, needles, and encampments remain. I'm really frustrated, and so are my neighbors, since we have nowhere to turn. You don't have to take my words for it. I have sent multiple photos and video evidence, proof, taken from my security camera, phone, to the city councils. So please ask them. I encourage the city council to get metrics and data from SPD and SFD on how many calls were made in a month concerning the facility in question. I wouldn't be surprised if it amounts to more than 100 in a month. Needless to say, my neighbor and I don't feel safe anymore at our home. And if this problem are coming from permanent housing, I'm very concerned. How can we ensure the safety of the community, especially to a temporary shelter like this one, which will turn into the permanent housing in 3 to 4 years, when DESC, that has over 40 years of experience, unable to do so? Thank you for listening to my comments.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate it. First of all, welcome to Shoreline. And I do mean that as a employee of the city, we value new people moving in all the time, whether you've been here 47 years, as one of our earlier callers, or a month. You are a valued member of our community. And my, my heartfelt feelings as a father of daughters myself to think about the safety issues that you would experience. So a couple of things I heard, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, is this notion of what happens outside the doors isn't our concern, right? Which was a message it sounds like you may have received from this project in Seattle, and I want our panel to speak to that, but also sort of this expectation in terms of trash, needles, cars, noise, and what you might expect to see or not see in this facility, because I appreciate you're wanting to have answers to those questions given the experience you've had. Colleen, I saw that you unmuted, so I'm going to start with you.
I did. I'm largely noticing how Kevin looks so wiped out. Typically, this is a question that I would throw to him, but clearly, Kevin, you are not feeling well. And so I'm going to reiterate some things I heard you say earlier, and you can just correct. Do you just want to field the question? Okay. You just look like you're about to fall over.
Yeah, it has not been a banner day for me, but this is important. I mean, I guess it goes without saying, but we are not DESC. And I don't know exactly which program we're talking about there. But what happens outside of this facility as it relates to our clients is our business. It always has been in our shelters and in our day center. And we've addressed, we've never had those kind of problems that you talked about, which are just a nightmare. And I'm so sorry you had to go through that. We've had some littering issues because we're asking people to leave early in the morning and they congregate at bus stops. And we have two places in particular that the staff goes to the bus stop every morning and cleans up coffee cups and things like that. So we're invested in taking care of the neighborhood. I mean, it's part of our good neighbor plan. It's something we take really seriously, and the proof will be in the pudding, right? Because we can tell you and make promises, and we can do all that, but until you have a concern and you reach out to me directly and I work with you on it and solve the problem, you're not going to know for sure. So, but that's my intention to do, just to have that open line with neighbors. To have my email to be able to communicate with us here in the center, but it is our problem. What happens, and back to what Mark talked about earlier. We are not doing surveillance on people. We're not following them around. But if word gets to us that something has happened, we will work with those guests to address issues, and that's what we do. I mean, that's already what we do. So, if that helps.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Polly, who's next?
So Haim or Heem, go ahead and unmute, and next it'll be Krista Tenney.
Hi there. Can people hear me okay?
Yes, and what is your name?
It's Haim.
Haim, okay.
Hello.
Thanks. So my wife and I are also new Shoreline residents. We recently purchased a home here about 6 months ago, and we actually moved from San Francisco, which is a place that very famously, infamously perhaps, has had huge problems with homelessness. And I have personally witnessed homeless behaviors like defecating in public, using drugs in public, and brandishing weapons like knives in public. And quite frankly, we're really concerned because when we lived in San Francisco, we got the same kind of assurances from our city government and the partners that they worked with that we were going to be safe. And that just really wasn't true. And we're really concerned that the same thing could happen in this neighborhood, which for many reasons we chose because it did not have those problems. We're a young couple and we're hoping to start a family. I've been the victim of crime before. And so I'm really, I think, desperately hoping for to hear how you can prevent the kinds of security, safety, community issues from occurring in this instance, when it seems like all of the anecdotes, right, all of that we have seem to point to it not working.
Okay, thank you, Haim. I really appreciate that. I think it's a challenge. I think, though, that what we have heard anecdotes of very unfortunate stories and clearly stressful and unhappy situations. We have heard tonight even, experiences of the opposite, of facilities that go in and don't have issues, don't have strong reactions from the neighborhoods once they're going in. So, you know, that I think is really important. And we can go back to maybe to Kevin and to Melanie here in terms of operations. But I do want to emphasize one other point, which is there's this potential action that the city council will have to take in October. And then they would have to temporarily do some land use stuff. I'm not the technician here, but then they'd have to do it again in 6 months. And so if this was a situation that was kind of sideways, you know, at the very minimum, there would be this 6-month check-in for whether this was being a successful program or not. Certainly, I can speak on behalf of the city of Shoreline. We would not just sit around and watch all Hades break loose for every day for 6 months until that day came around. There would be a lot of engagement. And Colleen has talked tonight about working with our you know, Shoreline PD. You know, that there's a lot of measures of accountability, but it really does come back down to, I think, Mark, some of the experiences you're seeing with shelters operations that are successful, and this commitment, Melanie, I've heard from you about working with the community and having that conversation. But I'll before I turn it back to you, I'll say one of the impressions about what I'm hearing tonight is that you have people on the street who get to go inside, and for the first time they get to just like sleep with a door and not have to worry about what could possibly horribly happen to them sleeping outside in the middle of the night. They can kind of come down from a pure adrenaline level to actually get a good night's sleep or start to address their issues. And these are people who want to address their issues because that is a screening criterion that I'm hearing from Lake City Partners. These people have to want to get things together in their lives, or they don't fit for this program. So you have a real strong incentive, it sounds like, built into the residents' experience to keep the good times rolling by not causing these horrible external effects that a couple of the most recent callers have worried about, because there's an alignment of incentives, I guess, for the neighborhood, for the program, and for the individuals themselves. That's what I'm hearing. But Melanie, maybe you could speak to that a little bit, and Mark, why don't you start from the macro?
Yeah, I can start on the macro level, you know, as I mentioned when we started, so the county invests across the county probably at this point in about 2,000 units or 2,000 shelter beds throughout the county, and I have to say, you know, I don't get a lot of complaints as the division director for housing, homelessness, and community development. My inbox is not full of complaints from the communities where our shelters are located. And they are located in church basements. They are located in city halls. They're located kind of throughout the county in various locations. And I think there is naturally a lot of concern when a shelter talks about moving in, talks about helping residents. And I think that concern and that fear is very natural. The path to success is exactly what Melanie and Kevin have talked about. It is a committed operator who sees themselves as community partners, who are open to answering every single one of those emails, having every single one of those conversations, talking about a resident or, you know, the neighbor who has a concern about the thing that they saw out on the street corner that frankly could have nothing to do with somebody who's in the shelter, but is still willing to have that conversation. That is kind of the commitment to success. I will say that's what the county really expects from its operators. And I just will say, just to say, I know DESC to be a committed and compassionate organization. I can't comment on the conditions around Clement Place. The county, the city of Seattle is the local jurisdiction in that case. But I do know DESC to be a committed operator and frankly a national leader in how to really look at how to assist the folks who are in the greatest need in our community. And I think there's been a lot of learnings from the work that they have done. And I would suggest, and Melanie can probably confirm, a lot of learnings that an organization like Lake City Partners takes away in how to be a good community operator, how to engage with folks, and really how to meet the residents of those shelters in a welcoming way that ultimately allows people to be successful in that shelter environment and the ultimate success, which is getting folks into housing.
Melanie, you want to put a bow on that?
I just wanted to say, you know, I am sorry that, you know, we as a society are having to experience, you know, such violence and witnessing the symptoms of the inequities in our communities, where not everyone is in housing, and so I just hearing the story of San Francisco and you, Chaim, being a victim of violence, and you know, I'm sorry that as a community, we're having to deal with this challenging situation, the crisis of homelessness, and that there is not enough affordable housing for everyone. And so, you know, it's my job to be solution focused and to really try to figure out and grapple together with the community and figure out how we can continue to advocate for people in our communities that are suffering and are the most vulnerable. And so I come from that point of view. I'm hoping that, you know, what we're offering is really going to set our community up for success, that together we will collaborate and be able to figure it out. So that is my ultimate goal, and I want to be in relationship with you on this. And so if that helps at all, that's my commitment to doing this work from the very beginning. That was my commitment to moving into Lake City and not being, you know, someone who's parachuting into a neighborhood. I realize, you know, that, you know, just Kevin being a resident of Shoreline, and Stanley as well, he is a resident of Shoreline. That's really shows our commitment to working together as a community.
Thank you, Melanie. And I think it's safe to say the city of Shoreline, as the people who work for all of the residents who will be neighbors of this facility, stands in the same position to support this neighborhood and to support success. So Polly, who's next?
So Krista, go ahead and ask your question. And next we have a phone caller ending in 0567.
Hi, thank you for having the meeting tonight. I have so many questions that it's hard to be short. So I'm just going to ask, I think 3 short questions. How will we as a community decide if this is successful? We live up by Shoreline Community College and have experienced individuals who are unhoused making, I'm just going to say, unwise decisions. So understanding that is always a challenging population, and finding ways to reintegrate them is always a concern. But what is the percentage that get housing, and what happens after the grant runs out? Excuse me, I've got a squeaky voice. So after the funding for the grant runs out, where will funding come from?
Okay, great. Thank you, Krista. 3 questions, but so efficiently asked, I'm going to just count it as 1. Okay. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So what I heard was how do you measure success? How are we going to know that this is working? You know, and then in the lives of the people you're working with, what kind of percentages are you seeing in terms of a track record? And then Mark, probably the last question is for you. What happens when the grant funding goes away? So what is the crystal ball for this? So maybe Colleen, you can talk about how do we measure success as a community. Melanie, you can talk about sort of the success rate within your program. And then Mark, I'll let you clean up.
So similar to what Mark described in terms of their contracting expectations, we currently do contract, the city of Shoreline does currently contract with Lake City Partners to help fund their rotating winter shelter and the outreach housing specialist position. And as Mark described, we also have performance measures that are part of those contracts. Melanie submits quarterly reports that talk about the number of contacts that Stanley in particular has made, the number of responses that have come directly from our city CRT team and or our first responders that he's followed up on. And then also the number of, there's sort of a tiered system in terms of the level of engagement that he's able to achieve with people, and ultimately the success of finding housing for individuals. Melanie, you mentioned the number of 74, I believe, from Shoreline, 73 from Shoreline this year. I don't know if you happen to know what percent that is of the Shoreline residents that you served, or if you know your overall percent of housing placement success. Obviously, that's the holy grail that we're striving for with everyone. Some of the challenges have nothing to do or have less to do with the individuals than have to do with the systemic shortage of affordable options for places for people to go. And it does push, I know, in my recent experience in another jurisdiction, it pushes us to think outside of the boundaries of our county and to really talk with people about what opportunities there might be if they were willing to consider going farther afield. Might their employment skills work for them in a Yakima or a Spokane? And might that be something that they'd want to consider and we could help facilitate? So it really starts to open up the strategies that need to be considered in order to find successful options when the cost of housing where we are and the supply of housing where we are both heavily constrained. So Melanie, I don't know if you know the percentages.
Sure. So last year we served 713 people. So our percentage of households getting into permanent housing is just under 20%, which isn't great. It does feel like we're doing better than we ever have in the past. So we just keep hoping that number will increase, but we're also committed to thinking about, encouraging our faith communities to free up land to build more affordable housing. How can we advocate for our larger community to put more investments into affordable housing? I just learned of a 125 bed facility that's going to be built just almost at the edge of Lake City, going into Lake Forest Park by the city of Shoreline. The Chief Seattle Club is going to be building that, and I know Seattle Mennonite Church is wanting to build housing on its property. So it's it's the housing piece that it makes it so hard to get people in, because the market rate housing is so expensive. So we'll continue to work on that. We'll continue on the advocacy front. That's what we can do together.
Thank you, Melanie. And Mark, anything on what happens when the money goes away?
Yeah, so I commented a little bit on this and at the start. So we kind of fund this through kind of a variety of sources, state commerce grant and local dollars that the county has. Our money is dependent on tax revenues, and our money is dependent on, ongoing federal programs. But I do know that at least presently, the county is committed to continuing to support these shelters. And I think we continue to prioritize that over other ways to spend the Department of Community and Human Services funds. And we have, by hook and crook, managed to keep all of our shelter beds operating, even through various downturns and COVID outbreaks. And so I think we remain committed to making the shelter continue to be funded and continue to operate. And I think, that provides that level of assurance too, that we talked about through the contractual relationship as well, that we're going to be able to be a good partner and with Lake City partners and do that and make sure that it's able to stay and get people pointed in that direction of housing.
All right, thank you. Polly, back to you.
All right, next we have a phone-in caller, and you should receive a message to ask you to unmute by dialing *6.
There we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, I know you want just 2 questions, so my first thing is a comment. I still don't feel that the issue of what happens to people who can't manage their behavior are handled. I don't feel like we've been given a really firm answer. If they can't manage their behavior and you can't find an alternative program for them, then where do they go? That's just a comment. I'd like to see you address that and get back to us. My next question is one that I don't feel you're addressing at all, and that is the issue of sex offenders. I live on the block this facility is on, and our business is across the street, across Aurora. So I have reason to be concerned. I come home from work really late at night by myself. There are children in this neighborhood. There are single senior women in this neighborhood. How are you gonna set the goal, the bar, for a sex offender's behavior? Are you gonna wait till someone is hurt? This is a big concern. There is a daycare next to that gravel parking lot. This woman may get put out of business because parents may not want their children there. I don't feel like you're addressing that issue.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your call. I think it's a tough and it's a hard and a necessary question. So we appreciate you bringing that forward. You know, I do think that there was some discussion of what happens to the person who isn't a good fit, keeping in mind that these are people who were already just sleeping outdoors in our community to begin with. So we'll see if there's a way to better polish that answer. But Mark, I'm going to turn back to you for that really hard and important question, if you want to tackle that, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to tackle it. And I should just note that I seem to be having some issues with my internet, so I apologize for that. I think, you know, sex offenders in our community, when they are released, often have an expectation around where they will register, that they need to be in contact with the local police. In this case, that would be the city of Shoreline Police. The sex offender is residing in the community in Shoreline. And so I think that expectation remains on, as do any expectations of people who have left corrections for staying in the shelter. As to whether a sex offender can stay in this specific location that close to a daycare, I'm not, you know, up to speed 100% on sex offender rules and who and what levels are able to stay in those facilities, but I think there are requirements as far as where and how people can reside if they are ex-offenders with, you know, with a prior sexual conviction, and their registration and the checking on that piece is a requirement for their release. I think if somebody is staying in the shelter, any police department, in this case, the City of Shoreline Police, can certainly, if there are, you know, open warrants or something along those lines, they certainly can go to the shelter and see if there are any sort of violations or issues in that regard. But again, I think sex offenders in shelters are not prohibited from being able to stay in those places.
Because the alternative would be that this sex offender would, this hypothetical sex offender would still be living on the street. Right. And the difference is whether they're then either living with or without supervision, without engagement, without something.
I think this, right, that's exactly right, Jim. And I think what we know is, by and large, the people who reside in shelters come from the community where that shelter is located. And they seek that shelter because ultimately, one way or the other, that is their community. And so, to your point, Jim, you know, if you have a sex offender that is living in the Shoreline community and is unhoused, the idea that they reside in a shelter and have that as their known address is preferable to them having no address at all and living in the community.
All right. Thank you. Polly, back to you.
So next, we have Brian Jukes, and after that, it'll be Leah.
Okay. Brian, you can unmute.
Hello. All right. Hello. I am a new Shoreline resident. I've been here for a year. I work as a frontline worker at the Fred Meyer on Aurora Avenue. I come into contact with the people that are going to be using this facility every day in my day-to-day. I mean, we do have a large homeless population in Shoreline and on Aurora Avenue. I see so many of them struggling. I've seen people using drugs in the bathroom. I've seen people in obvious need of mental health and care. My supervisors have asked me to call the police on some people for being unruly and things like that. But like, I feel like it's a moral obligation for us to be helping these people. They're in need of care, all of them. They need resources. They need infrastructure. They need things in place to help them get off of the streets and to help them get housing, mental health, drug rehabilitation. I don't believe that there's as many malicious sex offenders and drug addicts as some people in this Zoom chat have been thinking. I think that we need to come together as a community and help these people, because let's be honest, a lot of us are 1 or 2 paychecks away from being just like them. And I feel like we should be helping them. I feel like we should be extending a hand out to them and doing what we can. I see them every day. I am in loss prevention at my job, so I have unfortunately been put in the position to have to take food away from them from time to time, but I still feel like we should be doing more to help them. We should be doing more. And I feel like this facility is a good way to start that. And I feel like it's necessary for this community. I don't believe that they're here. I mean, they're just down on their luck. Most of these people are just down on their luck and they need help. And that's just, I feel like that we should be doing that. And I feel kind of sad that people see the negatives in it. Yeah, they're scary. Some of them, people having mental problems, are frightening, but they still need care. And I feel like that's what we should be doing here, and that's what we should be focusing on here, not all these scenarios of what could happen if a drug addict reoffends. They need help. They need social workers.
Brian, thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Brian. And thank you too, as essentially working at Fred Meyer as you have during this pandemic, serving as an essential worker for our community, because you're enabling folks to have been able to purchase groceries and everything else. So you're really contributing to our community in a way that deserves acknowledgement. So thank you for that as well. And for the time of taking the comments. Polly, who do we have next?
Next we have Leah, and after that it'll be Maggie Wilson.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Leah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I wanted to, this is going to be kind of wrapped up in comments and questions, but it's related to your approach to advocacy for the people that you're serving. So I've been hearing concerns about security not being adequate, that security cameras are not adequate, and I would agree, but I agree because I think what you need to ensure security is to meet people's needs. Security cameras aren't adequate because people offend when they have a tragically unmet need, such as housing, such as support. So I find it a little shocking how much this seems to be a punitive approach to seeing homeless people. So I'm wondering if some of the sentiments I've been hearing about a punitive approach of if someone who is homeless doesn't meet certain standards, then we punish them by forcing them back out onto the street or to pushing them elsewhere. Is that the approach, is that the mindset that we're approaching this with, that they deserve to be punished if they cannot, if they are not like meeting some criteria? My other question related to advocacy is, I understand that you work with some faith partners, and while I've heard of some good work being done with that, I am wondering what you do to advocate for LGBTQ people who are homeless, who might be excluded as a result of working with certain faith organizations. And then lastly about, I worry about the tendency for people of color to be called on, to be reported on to police for existing in public. And I wonder about the kind of advocacy you have to protect the people of color that will be in your shelter. And that's the crux of my questions.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. We've had so many thoughtful questions tonight from all perspectives, and we appreciate your contributions to the conversation today. So Kevin, you spoke earlier about how you try to work with any potential guests who could be part of your facility, and how does that work? Would you consider it punitive, or how would you consider it if someone just isn't ready to engage or isn't the fit? And then I think speaking to people of color or LGBTQ community members, what would be a great thing to touch on too.
Yeah, I'll let Melanie field our kind of inclusion philosophies. But yeah, I think it's a really good question, and what you picked up on, and we don't have the punitive kind of mindset here. We're a inviting in kind of mindset for all people. We are, I wouldn't even call it strict. I would just say we take our guest agreement seriously, and it comes down for us safety. And I'd be willing to share our guest agreement that's in place with anybody who's interested in kind of looking at that. It's all really common sense stuff. There's nothing, we're not asking people to do anything kind of overboard. It's all just about respecting staff and respecting other guests and respecting volunteers, and just being mindful of yourself as it relates to other people, the neighborhood and things like that. So it's all really straightforward and common sense. And if you operate outside of the boundaries of our guest agreement, let's say, your behaviors maybe threatening, and what we know about trauma and people who've experienced deep levels of trauma is that the noise doesn't really match the reality. And as trained, operators, we understand that. And so we have really good ways of taking walks with people and kind of separating them from a triggering situation and calming down. So if somebody, let's say, got in an argument with another resident, that's not like strike one. We don't do that. We don't punish people for having an argument or something. We would just separate the two, sit down, listen to both people equally, regardless, and not have a kind of stake in it. And we have really good success with the person first approach. And I've just taken many walks with people, and at the end of the day, it's just high anxiety. It's reoccurring trauma. And I know the story, and I know what's really going on. So it may seem like it's a very loud and upsetting thing, but at the end of the day, it was something small that triggered past trauma and past reactions. And so we know that. And so we just pull people aside and work with them and to great success. I mean, you do that a few times with people and they realize they're not in trouble for existing. And I love what you said about, people of color, just highlighting that and understanding that's the reality. And we're so sensitive to that and conscious of that. And we treat people, with the utmost respect and care. We care about these people. They're friends. We see them in the neighborhood. We work with these people for years. And, I walk around with my daughter in Lake City. She's 7 years old. She goes to Briarcrest. I walk with my son. He's 1 year old. We walk through Lake City, and people in that community know me. They know me in Shoreline, and we get a lot of love there from people that we work with. And it's more than a professional relationship. It's a community relationship that we have with people. And it feels good for them to be able to look at a family and get a hello, and that's what we're trying to foster here. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Thanks for asking that question, though. It was really great. And maybe Melanie wants to touch on our advocacy for marginalized groups.
Thank you, Melanie. Just before we pass the baton, Kevin, you spoke to being willing to share the guest agreement that you have. If that's, I think because we're trying to make all this information available to our community, if you provide it to city staff, we can also make sure that it shows up on the Shoreline website with all the other information we're collecting for this evening. So thank you very much for suggesting that.
And
Melanie?
Jim, I can jump in. That's definitely a question that we've received a lot on the Q&A, so that would be helpful. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kevin. And to you, Melanie, to talk about inclusion.
Sure. Thank you, Leah, for naming just the disproportionate realities of people of color in particular, and the challenge for LGBTQ folks to enter into a shelter system that might be challenged by guests that aren't necessarily also inclusive in their approach. So what one example, certainly for folks that are gender fluid, in our congregate shelter system, we've had people, identify where they feel the most safe. What I'm really excited about in this Oaks facility is that folks will have their own room. And so they won't have to identify male or female to know which area to sleep in to stay safe in a shelter. They will have their own room, and I feel like that creates safety. That's one way. I know in our staffing, we're really paying attention to making sure we have a representative staff of our population. So we have gender non-conforming staff represented, as well as Black, Indigenous, people of color on staff. And so that's, we're really hiring for that so that we become more aware of our own whiteness. So, and I'm speaking for myself and my experience of privilege, being able to walk in this community and feeling safe automatically because I feel protected by the larger community. So I feel like, we're growing in our awareness of that, and to have folks on staff that represent the Black, Indigenous, people of color, that there'll be advocates on site. So that is one way that we can strive to protect and continue to be aware. So thank you, Leah, for naming that. I know the answer isn't adequate, and I see Kevin is raising his hand.
Yeah, and just to be specific about our organization and our partners, there's no discrimination against any marginalized group with us or our partners. And we're an open shelter. We support, LGBTQ folks who come into our shelter every year, staff like Melanie mentioned, but in our partners too. There's no influence from partners on program policy. So we're not a faith organization. We have faith partners, if that helps answer that question.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Time check here. We're into the final 15 minutes of our time together. We still have a number of hands up. We may not get to everybody. So just a quick reminder, folks, if it doesn't look like we're going to have time to reach every single question, please write them. And our commitment is to provide answers to all of them to the best of our ability. Rhetorical questions are always more challenging, but factual questions you'll definitely get answers on. So Polly, let's look at who's left with hands up here.
So next we have Maggie, and after that will be Ed.
Maggie and then Ed. Hi, Maggie.
Hi. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the questions I had have already been asked, so I won't ask them again. But I will ask this. Jim, you mentioned that you think that with drug addicts, they can either be using and living on the streets or coming to the shelter. But I kind of see that as a false dichotomy, that there's also the option of enforcing the law. And I don't understand why we don't, instead of having that choice, offer practicing addicts the choice of either going to treatment or going to jail. That way you don't endanger the neighborhood and you do get the addict the help he needs.
Thank you, Maggie. I appreciate the feedback. Certainly, when I try to summarize something, I may I may not always get an A+ in that effort. So you raise an important point, and thank you for that comment. Polly, who's next? Did you say Ed?
Ed.
Okay. Hi, Ed.
Hi, I'm Ed Jersa. I live in the Highland Terrace neighborhood of Shoreline. First comment really quick. My background is as a professional firefighter for the past 18 years for the city of Bellingham. Bellingham also endeavored and opened a low barrier shelter, whatever you want to call it, an all day long shelter where you can be using or under the influence of drugs and alcohol and still be welcome. And it's a good notion to get people off the streets. The side effect as a result of that shelter being opened is an incredible increase in the homeless population in and around Bellingham city limits. Homeless encampments have grown almost exponentially. Downtown parks have been overrun with homeless people who use drugs, who discard their needles on the ground. I wouldn't characterize it as a danger to people as far as violence overall, but I would say quality of life for sure for the citizens of Bellingham have been greatly negatively impacted by that shelter. The homeless population has a great word of mouth community out there. And once they know that there's a place like this available to them, they will all go to that area. That is what's going to happen here in Shoreline. I'll get to my question. You've identified now that we're working with the quote unquote Lake City partners. I haven't seen homeless encampments in the city of Shoreline to any extent. I've seen individuals here and there, but I do see encampments in Lake City and Ballard and other parts of Seattle. Let's be clear, Lake City is a part of the city of Seattle. Why is the shelter not being opened in the city of Seattle? I think it's been made clear by Lake City partners that their intent is to move their population over to this new shelter. And my direct question then to Lake City partners is, how many folks that you have registered for your day drop-in center do you intend to move over here? And if then, as a result, our parks get overrun with other homeless that have come here for that shelter, what will you do to mitigate that problem that we don't face right now? Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. So some of what I'm hearing, and I'm just sort of processing this with you here, is this idea that there was a Bellingham shelter that somehow served as a magnet to create more homelessness in its vicinity. And the question would be, if something like that happened here, what would we do about it? I think there's a Lake City answer potentially there. There's also certainly a City of Shoreline response to that question. And then there was sort of a statistical question put in there as well that related to, you serve people now in Lake City, would they come here to Shoreline with that idea that there'd be this movement of individuals across city lines to inhabit the shelter? So, why don't we start, Melanie, with you in terms of talking about your operations, and then Colleen can speak to City of Shoreline.
Sure. Thank you for noticing what's happening in Lake City. And right now, under COVID, the City of Seattle Police are it is their policy not to move folks. So you are seeing bigger encampments than we've ever seen, not all of those folks are Lake City folks, that they have kind of migrated to that area because it's been a safe place, and and as a way to not infect others, CDC, the Center of Disease Control, has recommended that people not be moved, and that encampments be left as a public health response. So I am very aware of what's happening in Lake City. When it comes to the 24/7 shelter, we really want to identify the most vulnerable in the community. And because we have relationships with folks in the city of Shoreline, and Stanley has been working very hard to provide resources to the folks that are homeless in Shoreline, that's where we really want to start. And so the folks that we really want to support are people that we already know. And to a large extent, you know, we really know that the whole North King County area does not have a shelter and does not have resources. So we're expecting to be serving people from Bothell and Kenmore and Lake Forest Park as well. And so, that's who we are serving already in Lake City. So our day center has been a referral site for all of those north cities. And so we're really trying to spread that energy out and make sure that we are serving people locally.
And one of the things I've heard, and Colleen made reference to this earlier, and I think Kevin, you might have as well, people are very local. I mean, people tend to stay in a place. They might be homeless, but they're not interested in going to Tukwila or something. If they're homeless in Shoreline, they want to stay in this community. And so it sounds like that aligns with your experience. Is that a fair statement? Okay, great. So from the city of Shoreline perspective, in terms of encampments and stuff, you actually earlier said, Colleen, that you might think that this would actually reduce the incidence. Can you speak to that and what would happen if it goes in the opposite direction?
Yeah, so, that's our hope. And the other thing I don't really see changing is the current city policy that prohibits encampment on public property. And so what the city needs, if we're going to have a policy that says that, is a robust response that helps direct people to some resources that help them have another choice. And so that's the responsibility I see. That's part and parcel of having a policy that says you can't camp here, because then the people say, what can I do? And that seems like a reasonable question. So we are in the process of building out a more robust response to that question. But we also know that allowing camping anywhere in the city is not great for quality of life in a community. And so we are not trying to make that happen either. We're trying to find a balance that addresses the needs of people who find themselves unhoused and also continues to provide the quality of life that people that are currently living here enjoy. Both things matter. And so we're really looking for that kind of place in between that balances both of those interests and needs. Holly, I just want to say, just if you could keep an eye out in case Mark is trying to get back on the call. I don't know if he left or got dropped off, but just if you need to keep an eye out. And partly I'm thinking of that because this really was, even from the point at which it was a council goal back in April, the conversation was really about the lack of this resource for the North King County region as a region. And so it was never a given that this facility would be in Shoreline. It was intended to be a location that could serve the North King County region. And then the opportunity came up for a facility in Shoreline. And so, it's really, and the county's, I think, investment, glad to see you back, Mark, is that they are trying to build out a regional system. And the gap in services here is able to start to be addressed by virtue of the grant that's available to us now.
Thank you, Colleen. So we are practically at 9:30, which is when we're supposed to all turn into pumpkins and Some of us may be closer to pumpkinhood than others. We have 8 hands left, and we've had hundreds, literally hundreds of questions come in through the Q&A function. Folks, you guys have been so engaged, and we really appreciate that. And the City of Shoreline commitment is to arrange and organize those comments and those questions to provide answers, and for you to know that all of this information plus the footage from tonight's video will all be provided to the Shoreline City Council for their review. Several council members have been listening in today. The rest, I know, will be reviewing all this material. And it's a lot of material, a lot of great questions, so it's going to take some time. But next week, this stuff will be up on the website for everyone, you guys and the rest of your neighbors and the rest of the community to do. It's taunting me to see 8 hands left, but I'm afraid we're at the end of our time. And I want to thank everybody for your time tonight, and the members of our panel, Melanie, Colleen, Mark, Kevin in particular. You guys have done a lot of work to express yourselves and to share information. There will be follow-up. Colleen and Melanie, I'm going to give you just the last 90 seconds of our evening together to talk about next steps and where you see it going from here. Colleen and Melanie. And John?
Jim, if I can just jump in, I just do want to again thank everyone who wrote questions into the Q&A feature. I know we had a whole bunch of questions that weren't answered here. So, it may feel like we weren't answering them, and just want to reiterate what Jim said, that we will be going through all of these questions, answering those that we have not answered. Many questions, frankly, we were not able to answer real time because we need to be able to send those questions back to the experts that are here answering questions live. And so we will be doing that, and just again want to thank everyone for your questions, reiterate that we will be answering those in the coming week.
Thank you, John. Colleen, Melanie, next steps.
Not sure how much I have to add to next steps. We do have a meeting coming up to do a site review with both the project partners and Shoreline Police for that sort of CPTED, community crime prevention through community design or environmental design analysis and assessment. And other than that, I think we'll be working on answering questions.
That's great. And let's say this thing moves forward. What I'm hearing from Melanie and from Kevin is ongoing commitment to the community, to community conversations, more community chance to talk about the program and give a window into what you're doing if this program does go forward. Is that fair? Yep, thumbs up from Kevin. Melanie?
Yeah, I was just going to say we're going to take the city's lead in being responsive as much as possible to more questions, or if we need to attend a city council meeting or whatever. But yeah, certainly if there's neighborhood groups that would like more opportunity to talk, I would be willing to show up. Thanks.
Right. So we'd love to hear from you, members of the community, too, about how to keep the conversation going should this project ultimately move forward. But we want to thank everybody tonight, the panelists and all of you who've been listening to this evening's presentation and asking such great and thoughtful questions. We'll be back in touch. Stay in touch on the website. Again, if you go to the City of Shoreline home webpage under news, right there on the front page, there'll be a link for the enhanced shelter, and it'll take you to a page that'll have opportunities to see our updated information, read the information that's there now, and even easily find a way to submit comments directly to this Shoreline City Council. All of that's something you'll be able to do but through visiting our website. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a good evening.